morning, folks, and welcome to SciChat Saturday. Studies say shit. They do say a lot of shit, as we talk about here.
Unfortunately so.
Oh yes, indeed. But this is our day for informal conversations. Welcome if you're watching online. Welcome back if you're watching on the replay, of course. And I am delighted to have my guest who knows all things media much better than I do. In this case, he is Kieran White, a multimedia journalist with a background in entertainment, as well as the founder of Woke Screen and the host of the Crowdsource podcast. Currently, he's focusing on issues from the socio-political standpoint. My good friend, Kieran White, welcome to
Well,
SciChat
thank you.
Saturday. The fun that it is here. And I
Well,
think
thank you for having me. I'm excited.
it's fabulous. It's fabulous. And so, topic of the day, I mean, the title's a little tongue-in-cheek, but studies say shit, and they do say a lot of shit.
Yeah.
But it was really prompted. I mean, I think I talked to you about this offline, that like what prompted the thought and reaching out to you about this was a commentary on however many times have we seen these stories begin scientists show or studies prove or all this other kind of stuff, and then you read it and it's really not
Yeah.
what is pushed. But that's the topic of the day, and we'll go for however long we like with this. And folks, comment away if you have questions. I think I got the chat working right. If somebody can chat for me, that'd be lovely. It looks like
There are plenty of tangents that we can go down. So, yeah. And I think one of the things as well is that there's a lot of illusions with this stuff that people don't quite understand how these things come to be, right? It's like that most people, they see the end product, but they don't see how the sausage is made.
Yeah, exactly. And not just with media, even with everything that gets to before you get into a press
Yeah.
release, whatever it is. And sometimes it's not even a press release, as I've got I've got one that I'd love to hear your thought about. I know Gene and I actually did a Rogue Journal called recording on it. We didn't end up releasing it because of the because she actually ended up meeting the guy, talking with the guy, and we felt bad about ripping him apart after after she met him. It was like, okay, maybe we won't release that one. It'd be nice.
That's always a risk when you say something online. It's like, and then you're confronted with the person. It's like, oh, actually, they're a real person, and actually, they're a nice person. They might say stupid stuff, but they're actually a nice person.
That is, they're a nice person. So, yeah, we can get into it and go off on whatever tangents we'd like here. So, at least from my rudimentary understanding, it's like it gets into the standpoint of, sometimes there's a press release for a study, sometimes there isn't, sometimes it's a journalist that just finds it and
Yeah.
it looks like it's interesting, and so we end up going off down the tangent of writing an article that sometimes is not anywhere near representative of what the actual study says. But what is the I guess
Yeah.
we can start there and dive into the sausage making.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of give you the ingredients as such, whether it's like the famous hot dog analogy of whether you look at really, the all of the constituent parts and you know, and then you come away with it going, but I still like hot dogs. Fair enough, right? You know. um,
I
but
haven't
I
had a hot
think
dog in ages myself, so
no, I think no, I can't think of the last time I had one, but still knowledge is power, knowing how it's made, you know. But but still there's a couple of different forms, and it's tricky because I think first we need to understand why, or explain why it's so prevalent and why these stories are adopted as quickly and picked up as quickly as they are. And a lot of it comes down to the way that journalism has evolved and the funding models, right? And the way in which newsrooms are funded. And a lot of it now is obviously incentivized to be online, whether that be through clicks, whether it be through online advertisements, and and stuff like this, or whether it be sponsored, placements. And, so it's very tricky. And so with that, with online, as we all kind of know, in one aspect or another, you have to catch people's eyes. Whereas back in the day when it was print, you still need to catch people's eyes. Obviously, that's the point of having a front page splash, right? And getting that exclusive on there. But back then, there was some legitimacy to the titles. New York Times, it had a real prestige about it. Whereas now there's such there's a plethora of different options available to people, and not necessarily the titans. And so they're having to compete. The newsrooms, the ones that I've been in, unfortunately, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because you've got, on the one side of things, you have individuals that are very, very well trained in what they do. They come with a lot of experience. Sometimes, they're in there for like 30 years. But then on the other hand, transitioning them from print journalists or print reporters to having to then make sure their copio is SEO compliant. Copio. That's going to be a new brand, actually, where I'm going to teach people how to do AI
Before you
copy.
continue, I apologize to our viewers in the background who might have noticed my two cats are having an argument. It's like right in the corner of the shot. You can just see Luna right now, but yeah, the two of them decided they're just going to have a wrestling match right now.
They just want a cameo. That's what it is. That's what it is. But yeah, I mean, it's I remember when I was working in a newsroom, and it was, I mean, hats off to them, but there was a lot of stress when these older journalists were having to be trained up, and some of them were in their late 70s, and they were having to be trained up to do SEO, making sure and realizing that the worth of their article is based on how many views it has.
Right.
And so it's this, and so that's kind of the pretext for, or the contextualization of what's going on. Newsrooms are, the budget's being slashed, and we can argue whether that's right or wrong, or the nature of journalism today. That's kind of a different argument in itself. But ultimately, because there's such an incentive to get eyes on articles, they're more likely, these younger reporters that are fresh out of journalism school, or wherever they've come from, not necessarily journalism school, but fresh out of wherever it is they've come from. If they're emailed a thing, press release or something that says, study says this or study says that, then they're more likely to just print and put it up. Equally, if they've got a story that there's a editorial line that is, or agenda that's being pursued, then you can find it, as you well know, you can find a study to support pretty much anything.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but there's so many different things that go in it. But yeah, there's many ways it gets in, whether it be, a lot of times government agencies will also send in studies which carry a certain weight to them, and instead of the journalist looking at the source where it's come from and looking and diving into it, it is usually printed verbatim. And the same with other press releases. I mean, I know that privately I showed you some of the ones that I get, and when you dig into it, there's two types. You get one that really gives an idea of where the source material is from,
Right.
but it doesn't give you the actual data. It's pretty much, here's the data, here's what it says, print this.
Right.
And then there's other ones that do tell you, but then you realize that actually it's very weak data. And like most statistics, 1 in 5 people, support blah, blah, blah. And then you realize the sample size was 100 people, right? And so statistics
Yeah,
can,
20
you can
people.
make
I
them.
know.
Yeah.
Or it's like the idiotic study. It's one of my favorite examples of how the hell did this get published in a peer-reviewed article to begin with. There was a lot of things that got pushed out real quick because, of course, you're trying to get stuff done with COVID and the pandemic and all this kind of.
Yeah.
You wanted to get it out there, but it's like the conclusion of the study, and it's on the channel, so folks can go back and have a look if they don't believe me. With this was that the best fit hack for your face mask is pantyhose on your head.
Oh,
But it was a
oh.
sample size of 4 people.
And all of them are the same people that held up CVS's and robbed them blind. So I mean, it has a perfect double utility about it.
Exactly.
But
But
it's just madness.
no, it is just madness. Yeah, I always thought that it was kind of like we got to just get clicks kind of thing. So it's just like,
Well, in addition to that, the other point which you'll be able to speak to and the actual, I think a lot of people know what it means, but I think you can explain actually what it means in the process of a published, study. But there's a great illiteracy around what a preprint means, and there is a huge rush to publish something because it says what you want it to say without being peer reviewed or anything like that. They will just publish.
yes, yes. Yeah, and it was something I was going to ask you about because I'm. It doesn't seem like journalists make a whole lot of a distinction between preprints and peer-reviewed articles. If it's just out there,
Well,
and it's a study of something.
yeah, I mean, the thing is correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I don't quote scientific literature that often because, I'm not well versed in a lot of it to be able to, because I don't want to make these mistakes, or I don't want to highlight something that isn't kosher or completely correct unless I actually intimately know the text that I'm reproducing from.
Mhm.
But in theory, I could say 1 in 5 elephants, talk French, and I could put that study together, but then it would fail at peer review.
Mhm.
But in theory, I still
Or
got
it
a right
should
to
fail at
publish.
peer review. Let
Yeah,
us
well,
put it
yeah.
this way, it should fail at peer review. It's just like I'm just going back to the grievance studies affair right there, and it's just like,
Well, if
no,
they're
some of the
pink
wild studies
elephants
don't
that are in the baby pink shade of the trans flag, then it may pass. Um, but that's the thing, though. So in theory, I have the right to do a study about anything, but at peer review does not tell anybody as to whether it's a legit study or not. It's
Mm,
at the point of peer review that it should go through that vetting procedure.
yes.
So the preprint is literally could be anything.
Oh, yeah.
So there isn't even an entry point that it has to go through to get to preprint. It's there's no kind of what's the word I'm looking for? No kind of safeguards in that
So
thing, or
there's no
quality control.
there is no vetting with preprints.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no vetting with preprints. There we go. This is what I was looking for to make the point of what you were talking about with preprints, actually, because the study that Gina and I didn't end up going through on the Rogue Journal Club um, was on something called alphabetism, if you will. Yes, of all the isms that we have nowadays, alphabetism.
Is that the same as my prestigious theory in the Wokabet?
I don't think I know what that is.
No, neither do I, but I can say it because it's preprint at the moment. It hasn't been vetted. So anyone can publish that.
No, this was the preprint. Come on, share screen. Yes. Okay, window. This thing. So, yeah, preprints are very different because a preprint you don't. There's no vetting of it at all. It's something that's probably been submitted to a peer-reviewed journal and it's undergoing peer review, but it hasn't finished it yet. So it hasn't been fully vetted. It hasn't been critiqued. It hasn't been any of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Most folks don't know that. And particularly journalists don't know that, because the reason I brought this one up was because this one got, at the time, because this is 2018, this one got played up all over the freaking place in news articles and what have you. And I think here's a good example. What your last name starts with might affect how well you do in life. And that is the point of alphabetism. if the first letter of your last name is closer to the end of the alphabet, these guys in this idiotic preprint um, think or claim to have found that you will have a worse off time in life.
Well, actually, I think there's some merit to that because other than the problematic surname I have, um, I always remember at school, I was always last in the line waiting to get into anywhere because they used to do it in alphabetical order. So I think I can
Yep.
attest through my lived experience of
But
this.
but here you go. Is it's alphabetic injustice.
Oh, oh, oh,
Got
where's the
played up.
whiskey? Take a shot.
It got played up, but this is the thing that wanted to point out with it is because it never went through peer. It never got published anywhere in a peer-reviewed journal. Never. And it still exists as a preprint to this day. Obviously, I just pulled it up right in front of us. But
I mean, I guess the best analogy sort of comparison would be, legislation, right? It gets introduced as a bill, and anything can be introduced, and it can be co-sponsored, so you can get authors on the paper with you,
Mhm.
but it has to pass through, the Senate if it gets introduced into the House, and things. Is like the Senate is almost like the peer review process.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So yeah.
A small literature demonstrates that names are economically relevant. However, this is the first paper to examine the relationship between surname, initial rank, and male life outcomes, including human capital investments and labor market experiences. Surnames with initials farther from the beginning of the alphabet were associated with less distinction and satisfaction in high school, lower educational attainment, more military service, and less attractive first jobs. These effects were concentrated among men who were undistinguished by cognitive ability or appearance, and for them may have persisted into middle age. They suggest that ordering is important and that over reliance on alphabetical orderings can be harmful. Uh, but
Oh, good
you
God.
notice one thing when we critique this article, that was the one thing that stuck up. It was entirely men that they surveyed with this. It was never women. Why? Because of course, when women get married, we end up often changing our married name,
Yeah.
our last name to whomever our gentleman's name is in most cases, and so that doesn't help. But yeah,
What
it's
was the name of the person who put this together? I'm curious as to whether this was a personal. Oh, Zach.
well,
Maybe this is maybe just he's a
I
bit
have no idea.
peeved.
There's no way to know for sure, but yeah, no. If you go into this though with like just Google Scholar news search, it was like Colorado.
You want to have a little bit of
For
fun?
that matter, this is 6 days ago. Wait a second.
Yeah.
This is 6 days ago because somebody just reprinted.
Well, that this actually feeds in perfectly to another point, and that is
Reprinted the
something.
bloody article.
Yeah, this is something known in journalism called churnalism.
Hmm.
Now, churnalism is, it's effectively a derogatory term, but it in essence, it's churning out pre-packaged stories, and they're pre-packaged because they don't. There's no, if I get a press release that has everything in it, I just copy and paste it,
Yeah.
right? I don't have to vet it or anything like that. Now, as
My
someone
gosh,
that works in
same thing. It's even
academia.
the same bloody line.
Yeah, exactly right. So here's how you can have some fun with this, and this is how it's done also, in academia before they had those clever systems where the AI would work it out. Um, if you take if you take that quote there, so copy and paste that whole quote.
Okay.
That's my little personal blow against alphabet injustice.
All right.
Now go on to Google.
Oh, shut up, you stupid ad.
And we're going to do a little fun thing. We're going to do a Boolean search, which is fun. So if you just open up just a brand new Google. Oh, you got it. So in text.
Is that it? I can't remember.
So just open up a Google.
Oh yeah, I'm in a new Google tab right
Oh,
now.
Okay, okay. So
So
go
this
to the
my
front.
browser defaults to a Google search, so.
Okay.
Oh, actually, no, this
So
is a Bing search, but either way, a Bing search would probably do the same thing.
it should do. So if you go to the front of the quote and type in text, all one word, and then colon, right? And then hit enter. So what we'll do is now it might not
I might have
be.
put it might have been because I put the quotes in there, but
No, it should. Is the last one a quote or a apostrophe? Is it just cut it off? Oh, it is a quote. Yeah, so it looks like that quote maybe isn't. So basically the premise behind this is that it can come in two forms.
yeah.
You can get the study sent out. So it does seem like that this is. I mean, I can't imagine all of these publications were sat there going, "Oh, I wonder what to write about," and it's like, "Oh, look what I found." No, clearly this was like sent out on a mailer, um, and so there's two forms. Like the more respectable journalism is where you publish what you've been given, but then actually flesh it out with some original original work. But 9 times out of 10, if you just use the opening paragraph, copy that opening paragraph and paste it, you will find verbatim, boom, boom, boom. Usually it works with government stories, stuff about government matters and things like that. And then you find out actually it has its source back on government press releases.
Right.
So but that but it definitely does look like a result of a mailer. So it looks like a press
Well, yeah,
release.
and I mean, even this search kind of proves your point because you look at the two different dates on here.
Yeah,
March 17th of 2017 and January 15th of 2023.
yeah,
Somebody come back and just reprints the damn thing.
exactly, exactly. And you know that it's a bit like you've heard the studies around like the happiest day of the year
Mm,
or the saddest day. Like I don't know whether it's the same in the US, but here there's a term called Blue Monday.
mm,
Not the song. I love the song, but uh, the uh, the term is basically, and it's got really interesting origins. So this guy was commissioned by, I'm trying to think who it was. It was one of these like travel companies, and he was commissioned to do all of this like equation as to it's X amount of days after Christmas, it's X amount of days before your first paycheck of the year, it's X amount of days into when you're most likely to drop your resolutions. And so it's deemed as Blue Monday, the most depressing day of the year.
oh, okay.
And it's used in marketing for travel firms to get you to buy your holidays as a way to take away your blues.
Oh,
Now, the
sneaky.
guy that actually came up with it basically walked it back and said, no, it was just a thing. It doesn't really have any merit. I just done some,
Right.
random stuff. He then found out the happiest day of the year using the same thing. But you see what I mean? It's like you can do all of these different things and and it's always trotted out every time.
Right.
So, but yeah, it is crazy. And again, the people watching this, the majority of the people watching this now or on the replay or just anyone that you meet that isn't privy to this, they only see the final product. They
Yeah.
don't understand the complexity of, I think they think that journalists just go out there and get stories and things, but no, journalism has changed. A lot of it is what's happening on Twitter, what's being sent to them. They don't look for stories anymore. Stories find them. And there's very little when it comes to, actually doing some groundwork around those stories.
Right.
Again, because the incentive is pushing clicks through online content.
Well, in a way, I wonder if it complements the culture in academia and in publishing because I think just about every academic will know what I mean when I say this that it's publish or perish.
Mm.
Oftentimes for your career, you have to get papers published in journals of
Mm.
however what and generally if you're going more, you're going longer in your career, it should be a higher tier journal, which higher tier being how many more citations or how much more
Yeah.
visibility does that journal have or what have you, as measured by its there's different scoring systems for it that basically amounts to how many articles did the journal publish and how many times was the article cited by somebody else,
Hmm.
or the article cited by somebody else. So that's rolling scores that you can see every year, every 5 years, or however like that. But it's not, because it's unfortunately publish or perish. It's not about the quality of the
Hmm.
articles that get pushed out in academia. It's kind of complements the journalism thing, I would think anyway. It kind of complements the issue with journalism in that, it's just we have to get something out, otherwise I can't get tenure, or I can't get this grant, or I can't get this thing from my university professional,
Yeah.
or I mean, there's not the same degree of publish or perish in like a Fed position because you're
Hmm.
often paid on what's called hard money.
Yeah.
So you can take your time and do stuff that is a little bit more quality, which is a benefit of a Fed position. That said, you're also working for the federal government, which other things. Um,
You know,
you're just like, I should know. I just turned down a Fed position myself. So um, that's that's the kind of thing. Not out of any ill will to them. That's just not my particular chosen career
yeah.
path at this point. But
There's
that's
definitely a
what I
symbiotic
wonder is like,
relationship,
yeah,
and they mirror and prop each other up. And it's interesting you say that, because again, it's mirrored in journalism, whereby a lot of the awards now are won by, and things only get noticed when they get lots of eyes on them,
yeah,
not necessarily the outcome through which they produce,
right,
right?
yeah,
And it's, yeah, I mean, think about it. You've got, I don't have the data on this. I have the data on the cuts in newsrooms, which is staggering. Again, we can, there's going to be hardcore people out there that go, the media, blah, 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 blah. But I think that's very simplistic, because there are, but because on the other hand, they'll go, oh, Project Veritas are great. Well, they're still media, right?
they
There's
are.
there's varying distinctions here.
Well, and I
Um,
would think, right, it's not just the issue of bias in newsrooms. Yes, we know there's that. It's also the thing of just being sloppy when you have very few people to work and to check things, and you just need to
yeah.
get some kind of product out the door.
And the incentivization, the monetary incentivization, when your funding is, when you're not getting these big grants from, because back in the day, and even still now, there's a lot of grants and money that's bequeathed to these publications, or independent newsrooms, or things like that. Now again, they come with their own strings attached and stuff like that. However, that with that, your funding, right? You
Right.
you know what you've got, how many people you can hire, you can branch out into a very expensive area of investigative reporters on payroll. But now it is not like that at all. It's more, again, it is people that are driven by clicks and advertisement. And so that is where it falls down, because it is very tricky. And then we won't get onto this yet, because I'll go down another tangent, because it's like there's
Do
so
it. Go down
much.
tangents.
There's
Go
so
down
much, but
tangents. Do it.
it's I mean, anyone that knows me will know that I've always had this tension with the idea of citizen journalism.
Mm,
And it's controversial to say, because you don't want to come across as a gatekeeper, and I'm definitely not. I'm not employed by any agency or anything like that. I go out, I'm independent. I will go and I will do the work, and then I come back, and then I pitch my stuff.
do the work,
I,
Kieran.
I
Do the
do I do the work, comrades. Come on. Um,
Sorry,
for the greater good.
I had to get the little woke dig in there just because that is such a
Oh,
thing
we
they've co-opted.
we got plenty of the woke stuff. Um, but but that's the thing. It's obviously I'm a photojournalist, so my medium is the camera,
Yep.
or technically under the main umbrella of multimedia journalists. So, you know, that'll be through audio. I basically use media tools to tell stories rather than the written form. But I go out there, I'll go and shoot a protest. I won't be sent there by anyone. I'll go there because I'll go, oh, this is interesting. I'll come back, I'll edit up my shots, I'll upload them to stock agencies, less so now because I'm very thing on my copyright, and that's a whole other ball game. But you know, then I'll reach out to people or I'll put them online and people will reach out to me and go, oh, could we use these? And then, you know, I license them out and then that's how it goes. But when you have people that are, you know, on staff and stuff like that, it is very tricky. And it's the industry is it's very I'm going to reclaim the word because it's an appropriate word, but it is problematic because with citizen journalism. So here's my shtick with citizen journalism. It's great. We wouldn't have been able to see the multiple angles of George Floyd
Mm,
if that hadn't happened. I mean, think of most of the stuff that we've been seeing, the coverage. Without citizen journalism, we would not have been able to see that because reporters wouldn't go unless they thought that there was a story there to begin with, and you don't know. Um, but my issue is that on the whole, there are a lot of questions around the ethical considerations with things, right?
mhm,
Now, people that are out there just, and I'm not talking about people that are passively just, oh, something's happening, I'm going to take my phone out. I'm
right.
talking about people that are intentionally going, right, this is happening. I'm going to go to the scene. I'm going to embed myself.
Yeah.
Great. Hats off to you. But there are concerns I have. Well, firstly about safety. They think that they can just turn up and and do stuff, and it's not like that at all. You need to plan stuff. You need to make sure that you know what you're getting into. Um, but also, you don't want to run the risk of being the story, becoming the story. You should be invisible. And I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the same thing can also be said about science as a whole, especially on Twitter, where it's become much more of the personalities behind it kind of sometimes become bigger than the actual what they're doing, and the pursuit of that social standing becomes more dominant than the actual message they're trying to put out or the information they're trying to put out.
Right. Yeah, it can be, and I mean, folks who were following along this week know I did a video on the Fiedler on the Roof fiasco, which is that was a prime example of everything that goes wrong when you let postmodernist woke shit into science.
Hmm. Oh yeah.
So named because there was a Fiddler on the Roof quote used at one point, and the guy who unfortunately got the brunt end of it and was canceled for doing nothing wrong, really, was surnamed Fiedler. Hence the name Fiedler on the Roof.
Poetic. It's beautiful. I love when things like that. It's
I don't know
great.
if I was the first person to come up with that name or not, but it sticks. Um, but you know, there's an article that features in that whole fiasco where the author is talking about activist thinking, and he's critiquing another article,
Hmm.
which I agree with him was very much flawed in that it was activist thinking that was done in the article.
Yeah.
Um, and that is, I think, pointing to what you're talking about, because the whole reason this came up is because the guy was pretty much offended that people were criticizing his work. um,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, which I'm sorry, you're going to get criticized. That we've talked about this, and I figured this out in grad school, and I'm sure others have if they've been in grad school in any of the sciences. You figure out real quick that sometimes you get some really nasty people in sciences who are really harsh when they're critiquing stuff, and most
Yeah.
of the time they'll just leave it to your arguments, and then you go back to then you go back to being collegial. Sometimes that's not the case. I can speak to that fact. I had a peer review before the holidays. Or the reviewer, I do not know who the person is because peer review is for the most part anonymous. Um, but the person did at times get somewhat bitter and vindictive and personal in the commentary. Happens on occasion. That is
Yeah.
highly unprofessional to do, but it's activist thinking. You end up making yourself more the story. And there was a recent case of this, um, and actually ended up in the New York Times as an op-ed. I don't think it was actually featured as a news story.
Mm.
What it was is at the American Geophysical Union's big fall meeting in Chicago in December. During one of the plenary sessions, two scientists, shall we say, because I do not think of them very much as scientists after they did this, and hearing more about it, was they decided to disrupt the plenary, get up on the stage, unfurl a banner that said "Scientists out of the lab and onto the streets." The two of them were yanked off the stage by the convention center security and what have you. AGU has since withdrawn their presentations, which is really bad when that happens. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's a black mark on your career professionally to have something like that happen. And one of them was since fired from her position, rightfully so, because here's the thing: most people don't realize that those big conferences that a lot of us go to, most of us don't go to those paying out of pocket. Our
Mm.
employer pays the travel for us to go and to
Yeah.
present on those things. And so one of the reasons this one particular scientist was fired was because the organization that she worked for, Oak Ridge National Lab, um, basically said, you used our funds to engage in a personal activity. Hence the reason she was fired. But she wrote a New York Times op-ed basically complaining they fired her for her activism, trying to get more in that vein with her activism. The other guy, I do not believe he's been fired as of yet. I have not heard either way. But it's just
I've just
that's what I'm getting
Googled.
at, right? That's what I'm getting at to try and get roundabout back to your point is that yes, it is unfortunate. It is really disgusting. And most of the folks who I talked to about that particular instance, when I'm running in the collegial circles there, um, were furious with the two of them because there is a recognition among some scientists that you know what that really hurts the perception of scientists amongst the
Mm.
public, and generally speaking, it doesn't work anyway.
No.
Believe it or not, there's actually communication studies that show this. It's just like the apocalyptic activism doesn't work, and that's what they were
Well,
complaining about. It's like
the
scientists
issue
weren't
is
doing enough
that
with respect to climate change.
they're in a bubble and they bounce their ideas off of each other, but they're so isolated from actual on the ground thinking. And I've just Googled this actually, and it's funny you say that because they're part of a group that I'm quite familiar with, the Scientist Rebellion.
Yeah, I finally heard about it because of this, and it's just like you're
Yeah. There's some interesting video
which is
actually
you
of
know, it's
them.
funny because I think Extinction Rebellion came out and said, "Yeah, we're this thing that we've been doing, it doesn't work, so we're gonna tone it back."
Yeah, have you heard? I think they got like Animal Rebellion as well, and like they were very proactive. It was really interesting. A little tangent, but it was very interesting watching how they piggybacked off of the George Floyd thing.
Yeah.
And back in 2020, when I started going out and documenting a lot of this stuff, and it was very interesting to see the, you know, the actual socialist publications outside Downing Street. And it was really interesting because you had all of these different left-wing radical groups that were piggybacking off of this social upheaval.
Mhm.
And again, so you had the Extinction Rebellion, you had the Animal Rebellion, you had the trans stuff going on, and obviously you had the Black Lives Matter stuff going on as well. But then on the other side, you also had the anti-lockdown. You know, the establishment calls them anti-vaccine, but you know, I looked into this extensively over 2020, and I came away realizing that actually, you know, yes, there was some anti-vaccine sentiment in there, but that was only, you know, 1% of the overall story.
Mhm.
They're actually a lot more of a dive. I described it as a group of individuals conversing around a single, you know, grievance. Whereas the Black Lives Matter and all of these other groups, they're a group, they're a collective,
Mm.
unifying together to sort of instigate something for their own grievance. But yeah, it is crazy. And I guess the distinction I would make with what I was talking about with the citizen journalism is that there are two types in my mind. There are those that are that are that have very good intentions, and I will be doing something further in this year to kind of actually, you know, put my money where my mouth is with this. But I think these people just need to be mentored, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot that you can do where you don't have to be, part of the Mirror or the Daily Mail or the New York Times and things like that. You don't have to be on stuff. Citizen journalism at its root is a very vital source,
Right.
right? Because you're not paid up, you're not bought out by people, you're not relying on a paycheck um, from the establishment. You're out there doing it because you feel passionate, and passion is good. Activism, when you can't do things objectively, and I always say, I don't think there's a such thing as objective, um, you know, sort of reporting, right? I, I think the best thing you can be is fair.
Mm.
That's what you can strive for, because yes, there are, hey, Wikipedia snippet.
Hello,
There are
Wikipedia snippet. Welcome.
lots of different things that we bring to stories, right? And again, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I'm going to change the wording because I don't like the woke wording, but experiences, like you're going to bring your own experiences to situations, right?
Hmm.
And that will show up in your decision making, especially in highly tense situations and
Right.
stuff like that. That's human,
Hmm.
right? That's just human. Um, so there are people there that want to go there, and they're like, look, the media are failing us. I can't see my reality that's happening in my that's happening in my on the ground. No one's covering that beat. So I want to go out and I want to do that, and I want to represent my voice and the voice of the people in my community. All power to you. But when you do that, they've got there usually out of frustration. And so I think it's really good to harness that, but then help people realize how to plan to go out and cover things, how to do things safely, how to make money off of it, how to
Hmm.
sustain yourself on it, how to think about the ethical considerations.
Right.
Um, then there's the other one, like you're saying. These are the individuals that they go out because they are activists, they're professional activists, and they want to further a narrative. They're kind of ideological hunter gatherers.
Right.
They're going out there to take a out of context photo or an angle, and then they'll dip in, they'll get their video, and then they'll leave.
Hmm.
And so, um,
And in that vein, actually, let me put this up here because I think this makes the point from Wikipedia
yeah.
snippet. It's impossible to completely eliminate bias, but you can do the best you can. And yeah, and that's one of the points with particularly like one of the reasons we have peer review and the what's normative principle of organized skepticism in science as a whole is that idea. Yes, we know humans are not perfectly unbiased, but with
Hmm.
the goal of pursuing the truth about something, you have the adversarial construct. The tick no, I am not wearing the tick t-shirt. No, 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 I am not wearing the tick t-shirt. I'll explain that in a second. But with the goal of um the
That really threw
adversarial
you, didn't
kind of
it?
thing in mind with the I'm
That threw
confused.
you for a moment.
Yeah, no, I saw that come up. It's showing up on the YouTube thing faster than it's showing up in StreamYard. It's interesting.
Oh, oh.
So I'm seeing it before it pops up in the StreamYard. But no, 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 no. It's at that adversarial kind of thing of duking it out and well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? Why didn't you think about that? It's designed to mitigate that bias when you do the peer review and you're presenting at conferences and all this other kind of stuff. unfortunately, I think being undermined in the sense that when you started having the woke stuff invade the hard sciences, in particular the physical sciences, you couldn't have those disagreements.
Yeah.
Um, because you'd be labeled a crazy person or what have you, and there's things like that, but that is the idea of what it's supposed to do. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know that that exists at to the same degree in journalism anymore, unfortunately.
No, I mean, the thing is, so I mean, peer reviews, I mean, the more peer reviewers you get on it, I guess it acts as a decentralization for the human flaws
Yeah,
when it comes to those things. And
or at least it's supposed to.
it's supposed to, and then but then the issue is again another analogy. It's the argument with crypto or any kind of decentralized thing. If one person owns all of those decentralized servers, then it's not decentralized anymore,
Yeah,
right? So the same thing, if all of those peer reviewers are infected with the same ideological slants,
exactly.
then
That's the problem we face right now as
they're
scientists. Now,
decentralized, but they're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
let me explain the shirt before
Please.
before there's anything else that goes on. So no, it is not the tick. This was actually a Christmas gift from my family. It is a very frazzled and upset cat that's on fire, um, screaming, "It's fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine," is what it says at the bottom. So it's a Christmas gift from my parents.
I think that sums up life perfectly. Yeah.
For me, when I get overstressed about stuff, it's perfect because it's always like, "I'm fine. I'm fine." Of course, you know what the acronym is, right?
Wait, what is it?
There's an acronym for the word fine.
No, what is it?
Okay. Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. Okay.
Maybe I might do that t-shirt.
That'd be perfect. Why not?
but but yeah, so I mean, that is the issue there. I mean, I guess this touches on another point. When I was talking about the funding being
Yeah.
slashed in newsrooms, I remember there's there's different, and it crosses over with kind of journals quite a bit, but you have different editors, different levels of editing, and one of the important ones is having a technical editor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And a technical editor is basically there to make sure that you're using the correct terminology for complex stories,
Right.
or making sure that, if there's equations or something, that they are being done correctly. But they're meant to be the expert in the room that you can refer stuff to. And without that, then you end up that there's
Right.
none of that expert in the room that you can then go, look, I've just had this study and I'm writing this story about it. Or even if you haven't been given a study,
Yeah.
if you're attempting as a just a generalist journalist,
Right.
and you're trying to write something and use statistics and stuff like that you've taken from a study, you've got no technical editor there that you can then bounce that over to and get their critical eye on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so many, and again, I don't have the stats on this, but I would bet quite a bit of money that the average age of journalists now that are doing the online stuff, and especially putting out these articles, are probably late 20s. So they're very, very young. And so they haven't got that technical ability of that specialism that's been honed over years. And also, you notice as well that a lot of these, as you've just shown, right? And the one that I was saying about the Blue Monday, a lot of these studies that are published, they're very much trendy
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah.
So it's what's trending. Okay, now let's find a story around that. And that's usually what happens.
Right. Well, and the thing about it is like we should to great lengths point out, um not all studies are like these kind of mess of god awful things that we just showed.
No,
Not all
no.
studies are like this. And it's in part because, there are still a lot of scientists, myself included in this, who are primarily after what in the heck is the truth about these
Hmm.
things? Which should be what journalism is about too, but whatever. Um,
Yeah.
with that kind of thing.
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever might be the proper phrase. Um, and so there's not always all these bad things, but I think I mentioned this to you earlier in the week before we came on here. Like, there's also the issue, partly because of funding and partly because of bias, that some things that are going on um just don't need to get oh, for crying out loud, I can't think. Just don't get talked about by journalism.
Yeah.
Um, and what I was thinking of is earlier this week on her podcast, Megan Kelly had on Dr. Leonard Sachs, who is like 30 odd years experience with kids and families and an expert on gender and sex and all this other kind of stuff. And he was made a very interesting point to me that I think bears very much on our conversation, that there's been studies recently. I have to go find them myself. I haven't looked yet. So if anybody wants to do some live fact checking, go for it. Um, but there's some recent studies that have been done that suggest that women, on average, have a stronger sense of smell and a better sense of hearing than men do.
Mhm.
On average, just saying,
Oh,
because
yeah,
there's
women hear
exceptions.
everything. I can attest for that.
Um, but you never see it on something like the New York Times. You never see it even in just
Yeah.
a really small news outlet, because it's not the trendy clickbaity thing for journalists either.
No.
Um, or it's just, oh, hey, nobody wants to take the risk of putting that out there.
Well, also
Or for
it has to get through an editor, and an editor is human.
Yeah. Yep. But it's things like that. That's an omission. That's not a commission, if you will.
Yeah.
Or maybe commission's not the right word, but it's an omission in terms of media, because there's a lot of studies like that that get put out that just never get picked up.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder what's worse, incorrect study that's put out and turned into something that isn't, or a study not getting in that should get in.
Yeah.
It is a tricky one. And I'm just looking at the comments on the side, and Wikipedia snippet obviously makes the point that that has been made very, very clear recently, that obviously Twitter censors stuff and works with government agencies. We know this, of course. It was, and I'm sure it happens to this day, and we know that there is this revolving door of government agencies, intelligent agencies, all of these things, and journalism, right?
Yeah.
And and so what we see, I mean, back in the day, and I'm pretty sure it still happens. I've got no proof of this, but I'm sure it still happens. But the way it would work is, it was well known that the BBC had, I forget which one it is now, whether it's MI6 or MI5. I forget which one is the domestic one and which one is foreign adversaries. I forget, but there's some of the numbers. I'm guessing MI6 because Bond was always external threats and he was MI5. Sorry.
Yeah, Secret Service.
Yeah. But there was always an intelligence officer that was there in the BBC, and whenever a journalist would come in, basically the intelligence officer would look at their documents and their background and assess them as to whether they should get access to sensitive stories. And that was never spoken about within the BBC. It was always a need to know basis, but it was always
Richie
done.
corrects you on that one.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And so that was always done. And what happens is, this is the way it happens, right? So you've got to this is how propaganda gets into the system. You have this kid that comes out of journalism school, right? Mid-20s, happy days, he's just landed a job, perfect. He then gets groomed by someone in the intelligence agencies, and they say, hey, I've got a story here, do you want it? And I'll be your source.
Right.
And he's thinking, great, I've got someone that's giving me some information, and perfect, and he's my source. I've got an in, right? And he's really enthusiastic. He takes it back and passes it to editor, and he's gone, look, I've got this great story. They publish it, and because his over enthusiasm, he is a weak point to get that story put there. And because it's an anonymous source, and because it has the veil of authenticity that publications, they still do have, whether you agree with them or not, they still have
Oh yeah.
that command. It carries a lot of weight. And so there's so many different ways. And obviously the Twitter thing, we know, that's been happening. I mean, that's a lot more overt.
Hmm.
But the stuff with journalism, and also, look, you see these people that work for the government, they then go and become commentators on CNN. And then there's this whole thing, or, people that work in the intelligence agencies work for these publications or these broadcasters. So it is a revolving door. I mean, we see the same thing that the big dog at Reuters, was also working at Pfizer at one point. All of these people, it's this big revolving door. It's the same with government, right? They become lobbyists, or they work for these big companies, and then they go and get jobs in the government, and then they'll go and back work. And it's such an incestuous system.
Oh yeah.
And
Well, with the editors thing, it's I think a different but related problem when you're talking about the journals before you even get to the
mm,
news media kind of thing. Because like the journal editors, most people don't realize this. The journal editors are not paid. They don't get
mm,
any money for anything that they do. It's an unpaid salary. It's considered a service on your career in on your resume when you add it in there. I've been editing this journal, or I've been a chief editor for this journal, or an associate editor, or what have you. In that, but it is their job to, every time an article comes in, to facilitate the review process and make sure, this article gets proper review and thorough critiques and what have you. But they are unpaid to do it.
yeah.
So it's something that's been on my mind, is like, do we need to change the incentive structure for that? Because for them, it's supposed to be just a career incentive, but or here, and
Yeah,
Richie
what
has a,
cause are they fighting for? Objective reality and making sure
yeah,
that things are
the job
done,
there
or
is to
ideological?
fight for the objective reality, to make sure that,
Supposed to.
supposedly, to make sure that the articles that are coming in get a fair shake in peer review, and to, facilitate disagreements. Like when I had the
Mm.
one guy in my peer review who was bitter and vindictive, we complained to the editor, and to his credit, the editor agreed with us, but he also told us the reviewer didn't want to see our article again anyway. He was that upset. So
Is there any like non-monetary benefits they get, such as, like, uh can they boast that they are these people,
yeah,
and
it goes on. It's a career thing. It goes onto your CV.
right.
So yes, Wikipedia snippet is pro bono work for an editor in a journal, unlike an editor at a news outlet or something like that, where it is a paid
Yeah,
position. No, 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 no. You're never paid as an editor of a peer reviewed journal,
right,
with the
right.
exception of two things, because you have the editors that oversee the peer review process. They are unpaid. But you do have the editors, like at news media, where it's typeset, copy edit,
Hmm.
all those kinds of positions, because they're not editing the content, they're just editing, for readability and make sure it
Sure.
fits up to the publication standards of the publisher. Those are, yes, I am referring to the scientific journals specifically. Um, those are paid positions from the publisher, not the other ones, because everybody who's first overseeing the peer review process, they do it for free. It's a bonus on their
Right.
career, is what it's supposed to be. Um, and Rick G has a question for us. Let me put it up here. Don't you think that hive mind is as bad as bias? Yes, I think we've both hit at it a little bit. It's groupthink, is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue they're distinctive things. We're all biased. But hive mind is different in the sense that your biases are a collective. You have collective
Mhm.
biases. Um, I have biases. Adrian has biases. Rick, you have biases. Everyone here has biases, and you're not always aware of them. Um, there's a word for that.
Unconscious bias, we know.
But
That
I
is
mean, look,
that is not a that is not a wrong thing. I know people, we riff on the unconscious bias thing because it got ripped off by the woke, but in some of this, but in some of the psychology journals, it is talked about. But there's also, what I think, what it was, one of the critiques of the unconscious bias with respect to like behavior, is the problem is one of the psychology journals pointed this out. I'm trying to remember which one, but there's something in the neighborhood of 200 cognitive biases in the human brain that are just like heuristics that we use to navigate life. There is no way of knowing which one is acting in any given situation in a person's head. That's
No,
why
and a
the
lot of them are
unconscious bias thing,
survival,
as the
and
woke part of it falls apart
yeah.
scientifically, is you cannot possibly tell in a given situation which one is acting.
Hmm.
You can make all sorts of mind reading assumptions.
I mean, the prime example is like you see someone that's, skulking down the road
Yep.
in, dark alley or something. You decide, as a woman, you decide to cross the road.
Yeah.
And that it can get translated. I mean, that's just fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's just survival. But then, if the guy happens to be of a minority background, and then it gets conferred into something else, and that's when unconscious bias gets bastardized and turned and hijacked for that ideological, vehicle.
Exactly. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. That's my biggest concern with like peer review right now is if it all suddenly gets like either groupthink or hive mind that everybody's of the same ideological preference with peer review. This is why I get so many requests to do peer review right now, because I think differently
Yeah.
than a lot of others.
Yeah. I think heterodoxy is going to be a currency soon. It's
Can you provide a peer review journal article that leans a certain way due to bias? If you give me a second, I can actually pull that up. Because I have it from the Fiedler on the Roof fiasco.
love that name.
Oh goodness, yeah, it might take me a second to find it. So if you want to fill space, but it's it's the original article that kicked it off. It was written in 2020 here. That and I apologize for not clicking to show it. It just came up real quick. I'm like, I'll just say it. Sorry. Oh gosh, where is it? Unsafe science stack. There it is. It's linked off of this page, though I can find it. It's an open access article, but it is one that I think is actually quite biased itself. Here it is. Share. So this is the one that kicked off that whole Fiedler on the Roof fiasco in here. Because people were responding to this article, and the editor intended it to start a great, nice, scholarly conversation about diversity in science, racial inequality and psychological research trends of the past and recommendations for the future. And so this just the abstract might give you a sense of why. Race plays an important role in how people think, develop, and behave. In the current article, we queried more than 26,000 empirical articles published between 1974 and 2018 in top-tier cognitive, developmental, and social psychology journals to document how often psychological research acknowledges this reality and to examine whether people who edit, write, participate in the research are systematically connected. We note several findings. First, across the past 5 decades, psychological publications that highlight race have been rare, and although they have increased in developmental and social psychology, they've remained virtually non-existent in cognitive psychology. Second, most publications have been edited by white editors, under which there have been significantly fewer publications that highlight race. Third, many publications that highlight race have been written by white authors who employed significantly fewer participants of color. In many cases, we document variation as a function of area and decade. We argue that systemic inequality exists within psychological research and that systemic changes are needed to ensure that psychological research benefits from diversity in editing, writing, and participation. To this end, and in the spirit of the field's recent emphasis on metascience, we offer recommendations for journals and articles. So, yeah, I think Corn Pop here sees it. Attempts to denigrate things here on that, but this article, the reason this one got roasted, and I think rightfully so, is that the focus was entirely on race. There was such an activist focus on race being the issue of everything in here. And that's why I say it was biased. And that was the critique that was given here of that article. So this actually summarizes a lot of the critiques, making the very good point that when you're talking about human diversity, it's not just race, but in a desire to push something that got peer reviewed and published, by some
And
people
you
very
know how
psychologically
this also
biased.
feeds in as well is the
Yeah,
fact that we know how to read these. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I know how to read all of the methodology and things like this. I mean, I'm not quite clear on what those equations are and stuff like that, but I don't pretend to know.
yeah,
The problem comes when you have individuals citing studies, but they only read the abstract
yeah, yeah,
or they read the conclusion.
yeah. But the intense focus on just doing race in this particular example um is what led the author to say, hey, you need these things in journals, you need, participant diversity, what have you. But they're only looking at diversity as this single thing of
It's
race
just in a
portrayed in the
vacuum,
article. Yeah,
and
it
that's
just
not how
exists in
life
a vacuum.
works.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, corn pop, unfortunately it can be that bad. This is a particularly egregious example. It is not always the case that it is this bad, but it does unfortunately get a lot of play. But yeah.
I'll give
Oh yeah,
you,
yeah.
I tell you,
This is the one that got me, because this is one of the reasons I know. Positionality statements. I've seen this a lot more in the social science literature. Whenever there's DEI stuff talked about, there will be a section paragraph now in some of these articles where they're saying, well, so and so is a white person, so and so is Hispanic, so and so is this, and this contributes to our experiences, and our biases may be present in this article, kind of thing.
I
Positionality.
but I love the fact that they are listing many different variables there, yet they don't entertain them into the
Yeah.
article
In this
itself.
particular article, it was not entertained. So this
I
is a
I tell
particularly egregious example. I would not say it is all articles that I run across, and particularly it's more egregious in the social sciences than it is in the physical sciences.
And that the other thing as well, outside of studies, and I bring this up because I remember this was I haven't really told my story of what went on at my university, where I basically pretty much demolished them, and it cray cray, absolutely cray cray. But what happened was, I remember we were doing one piece of work, and again, so I won't go into depth of what happened, maybe for another time. But long story short, I went back because I really hate time wastage, right? So I went back during the coof, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go and finish up my bachelor's. So I went back and I'd done that. Now I think I've lived more lives than the average 97-year-old in my 27, soon to be in 7 days, my 28 years on this
Cool.
planet. Yeah.
Well, happy early birthday.
Yeah. We tend to ignore them after 25, but yes. So, but, so I've traveled the world. I've been in the industry a long time. I've spoken to lots of people. I've done a lot of things, and so I come with some worldly knowledge, right? And so I went back to university, and it was crazy because this was when I was starting to realize what the hell was going on in the world, right? And I remember that it was so much race, 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 race.
Oh yeah.
And me being me, because I hadn't been in the sausage factory, I'd had a break and lived, right? I came back and I was calling BS on all of this. They did not like it and they didn't know what to do. And one of the things they were trying to force down our throat was the fact that all algorithms are racist. I'm gonna take that's just a realization, and you're not saying, "Wow, Kieran, you look so haggard for your age," and oh my god, you've really surprised me.
Oh, here you go.
So thank you. Middle age? Oh, bog off.
Dude, guys, he's not middle age. I'll be 37 later this year, okay?
Good God, I was starting to like you, Rick. I'm going off you now. Uh, but thank you all the same. But one of the books. So again, what was interesting is on my course they never gave us studies to look at.
Mm,
It was all books and literature, right? And these were all written by activists. And one of the books they gave us to read was a book called Algorithms of
don't feel old.
Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. And it was written by Sophia Noble.
Mm,
Now, what I pointed out was that the teacher it was really interesting because the teacher that was teaching us this stuff, you could tell that she'd been through a flash training course on diversity and all of this stuff, but she didn't really buy into it.
Which, by the way, the
And
DEI courses don't work according to published literature. They actually have very negative effects. There's a whole
yeah,
video on my channel about that.
yeah, I also cited that as part of my degree process. I didn't quite like that one either. Um, they didn't like it when I said Black Lives Matter was actually a neo-Marxian conspiracy theory either. So, it was like Star Wars where Luke, destroys a Death Star from within. I done that.
Oh dear.
Um, but no, I pointed out, I said this author is ridiculous. I said she has no idea and is not paying any attention to SEO or any of those things, right? So her premise with this, and it feeds back into what you're saying about all the variables and looking things in a vacuum. What her premise was that when you go onto Google, onto images, and you type in 3 white boys, it'll come up with these stock photos of these happy families and all of this stuff. But when you type in 3 black boys, usually it's just mugshots and, all of this stuff.
Hmm.
And, I'm happy to entertain that there might be some,
No, sure.
racial biases there. But that's in a vacuum. You need to talk about the other things. I build websites, right? So I know about
Wow.
SEO. I know all about this stuff.
Yeah, and
And
things
so
like algorithms like SEO and what have you really just depend also on whatever the heck you're training it with.
exactly.
So, like, if you had stock photos the other way, you'd
Yes.
get a reverse result. That's not necessarily a fault of the algorithm. That's whatever is available to it.
Exactly. And, the point I made was the fact that, I want to know, which this book never provided, I want to know geographically where the search was done for 3 black boys in the country.
Mm,
Was there a high crime rate? Was there a local case that was really proliferating this story out there? Was it a syndicate story where it was like, a Fox story that was then pushed out across all of their different networks, and then the algorithm was compounding this through, because SEO works, that, Google ranking
yeah.
works based on how many people are clicking through to it. So you're more likely to get these big networks that are running these big stories. There was none of that. And I said, look, while I'm happy to entertain the premise, you're absolutely ignoring everything else. And at the time, I didn't quite understand what they were doing. I just thought this woman was thick as anything.
Hmm.
And they didn't quite like the fact that I was questioning it. But again, it feeds into what you're saying about, you have these studies, and while maybe the measurements and study might seem legit on the surface, you have to realize that when things are done in a vacuum of other variables, then it doesn't add up.
Just getting some interesting commentary that's showing up in the chat now. Which, by the way, don't feel old, Kieran, because apparently Wikipedia says they're 57. So
You're only as old as you feel.
exactly. No.
I feel
Wikipedia says
90
you
with
are
my
not
back.
57. You are not 57. You are 12.
That was a random number you just picked.
No, it's not. Do the math. 57.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Like, I'll be 10.
Yeah,
Think about it,
I'm
you'll be
10.
10.
I'm 10 plus 18.
There you go. Yeah, no, it's interesting because it is unfortunately a problem because of the biases with the race and what have you. That goes back to, when did we start getting all of this into academia and what have you? Because academia is a lot of the training place for journalists, for scientists, for
Yeah.
doctors, for everything like that. So where it goes there is where it comes out.
You know,
later.
the other thing that's to blame, these things.
I was going to ask about that. It's like, how do those things feed into this mess?
Well, I'll show you, shall we? So let me go to So anyone that doesn't know what a style guide is, right, or a style book, Adrian, I'm sure you're familiar with
There's
these.
different ones for scientists, but yes.
Yes. So the publication I used to work at, it wasn't anything to do with mainstream news or things like that. It was a different sector, but it was still a newsroom, right? They had their own internal style guide, and a lot of publications will have their own internal style guide. where they don't, they will sometimes default to other style guides, like the BBC style. BBC has a style guide, the Guardian has like a style guide, but the Associated Press, this is the most this is kind of like the standard, right? Now, what this does
I'm just
is
seeing the commentary.
I was maybe I'll have to come on at some point and explain how I delivered the nuke to the university system.
You may have to do that at some point. It might be
It's quite
interesting.
an interesting story. It includes the Free Speech Union, the House of Lords in the UK, and me coming out with a first class honour degree, even though I questioned their narrative and destroyed it. Yeah.
That'd be fun. We can do that.
And I quoted James Lindsay probably about 50,000 times.
Mm.
It was beautiful. It was
That's a perfect one
beautiful.
to do. Yeah, no, go for
But
it.
so the style guide, so what it will do is it'll tell you how to abbreviate words, it'll tell you how to reference certain words, basically tells you how to write, if that's a
I mean, not how to write necessarily as much as
yeah, that's not a wrong term. It's
specific abbreviations you should use and how to cite stuff. And
so if we go to one of the favorite words, black, right? This will show you, and then once you understand that most publications are running off of these books, you will understand as to where a lot of the stories are coming from, and you'll understand that it's a bit of a lazy thing to say that all these journalists and everything like that, a lot of them are just ignorant and they just default to what the style guide tells them. The style guide is kind of like their Bible in a sense, and so it is the ordained speech. But if I look at black, where was it? I don't know whether you want to fill in while I find this page, because it's I think it's under race. They do these weird things where you look for one word and it says, have a look at this section under race. But the point being is that it makes it, like, for example, there's an entry here on, so it has a whole section on the punctuation. And there's one here under exclamation point. It says, follow these guidelines. Emphatic expressions use the mark to express a high degree of surprise, incredulity, or other strong emotion. Avoid overuse. Use a comma after mild interjections. End mildly exclamatory sentences with a period. Placement with quote. So again, it just gives you so many different things. When it comes to how to format your work. It also gives you here, about social media use,
right.
how to use social media, digital security, writing about religion.
Okay.
Where is it? Media law. That's always my favorite section. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I might have to do a whole section on this at some point, in a separate video, because I think it's so important to teach people about these style guides and actually where a lot of the formatting comes from, because there's a lot of rules here when it comes to fabrications, right? Talking about what is and what isn't able to be used. I know I don't want to dwell on this too much. I don't know if you want to fill in while I quickly find this.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, because what I was looking for real quickly is that you guys, there's style guides, but for the editors of different journals, in different peer reviewed journals, they have a similar thing. They have editorial guidelines, of how do they handle different things and what have you. And I was trying to find the example I was thinking of with the Royal Society of Chemistry. Shout out to the British on that one. Because what happened was oh goodness, what happened was quite a kerfuffle. And by the way, brainstem is saying that Google actually tripped and changed the algorithm after that whole thing came out. Oh, this is the right one. There we go. That's the right start of it. Sorry. Yeah, Google changed it when they were confronted with that whole thing that you're talking about. So
yeah. But again, I don't know. So
Yeah.
the book that I was referring to,
Yeah.
now include newly introduced criminal image of white tea, wholesome images.
There's
but
that.
but again, it's like, where are you? If you're doing a search for 3 white boys and you're in the Topanga Canyon area, you're going to get a completely different outcome than you are if you're doing a search for 3 black boys in the Chicago area. I mean,
Mm.
unfortunately, that's just fact. Um, I've got it here, by the way. So black under the style guide.
Yeah, yeah.
Do I have to censor myself with what it says here, or can I talk in
If it's something where
context?
YouTube may remotely get rid of my channel right now,
All
please.
right, I will be careful.
It's like I'm
Um,
not monetized on this, but I'd prefer not to get a strike on my channel right now.
so it
That will
says
prevent
here.
it from getting monetized eventually if that comes of it.
All right, I'll behave myself. Um, so it says here, blacks, whites do not use either term as a singular noun. For plural, phrasing such as black people, black teacher, white student is often preferable. When clearly relevant, black officers account for. So it's given a quote. Black officers account for 47 of the police force, and white officers nearly 43. The gunman targeted black churchgoers. Like these examples are great. Um, the plural nouns blacks and whites are generally acceptable when clearly relevant and needed for reasons of space or sentence structure. And then it says here, black as an adjective, acceptable as an adjective. African American is acceptable for an African black person of an American black person of African descent. Use enro or colored only in names of organizations or in
Mm.
rare quotations when essential.
Okay, I see. I
Um,
see why you were.
yes,
Thank you. I
yes.
appreciate it.
For the record, I'm very strict on this. I believe wholeheartedly in quoting the text thing, but at the
Yeah, no,
same time,
I
YouTube
believe
is the
very
overlord.
wholeheartedly in quoting the text thing though, but I also know that
Oh
YouTube.
no, yes, yeah. Don't want to get into a Daily Wire contract argument with this, but
Well,
but
we're
there
not
was
going there. We are not
no.
going. Not the subject of today.
um, but there's so many different things here, and there was one that I went over in my locals a while back, and there's actually a trans style guide.
Right.
And it talks about the fact that you should always include a trans person, even if they are. So if you've got someone that's specializing in gender, like a gender expert, you should always actually get rid of them effectively. If you've got the option of them or a real trans person, you should
Oh,
always go for the trans person
okay.
over the expert.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's
But the
about
point I'm
centering
making,
lived experiences, which is a stupid
yes.
well, okay. Pardon a momentary rant. I hate the phrase lived experiences. The
Yeah.
reason I hate the phrase lived
It's
experience
redundant.
is because it is freaking redundant. Yes, that is exactly what is there an unlived experience? Is there an undead experience somewhere in this? I mean, every experience is by definition something you live through. So lived experience is a stupid fucking phrase. Excuse my language. Um, on this, unless you're going to have an unlived experience somewhere, which I don't know how you have an unlived experience. Are you a dead person walking around? What the heck? Sorry,
I
that
mean,
was my total
may
rant of the day.
I mean, maybe when you're having a life review or something. I don't know. Who knows? I
But no, I
digress.
was going
But
to say there's similar things in that journals have editorial guidelines for what do editors do with certain situations, how do they handle this, how do they handle that.
yeah,
And there was one I talked about it last year that came up with the Royal Society of Chemistry that presents a problem. So this is unfortunately one of those examples where you're seeing woke shit get into chemistry because it caught a bunch of news this way. This ended up in Chemistry International, a different journal. uh, Royal Society of Chemistry provides guidelines for censorship to its editors. So the first author here is Anna Krylov, which if you don't know her, you should know her if you're interested in the science stuff. She's not on Twitter, but she is a vociferous defender of Enlightenment and Western thinking and what have you. As she talked about in her like sort of debut article on this thing, the peril of politicizing science. She grew up in the Soviet Union, so yes, she understands this stuff
Yeah,
very intimately
she's
well.
got a bit of skin in the game there.
Yeah. Yeah, but the document of the most recent guidelines provided in the Royal Society of Chemistry begin this way. We have a shared responsibility to guard against all forms of discrimination or exclusion. We expect all staff, authors, reviewers, and editors to cooperate with measures introduced to ensure inclusion and non discriminatory conduct. Our aim is for all published material to be respectful and accurate and relevant. The aim of this guidance is to help you to identify and prevent publication of inappropriate content in our journals and books, and to encourage you to reflect on how inappropriate content can impact members of the community and readers around the world. The guidelines continue. Words, depiction, and imagery have the potential to cause offense. Therefore, we need to consider how content might be perceived by others. There can be a disparity between the intention of an author and how their content might be received. It is the perception of the recipient that determines the offense, regardless of the author intent. This highlights the need for scrutiny and awareness at all stages of content creation to publication.
As
From
well as
content,
mind reading.
as well as mind reading. But this was verbatim from the guidelines that the Royal Society of Chemistry provided to its editors.
I just realized what this picture is. I was going to say they're funny looking Q-tips.
Yeah, no, don't. We know what that is.
Don't want to stick that in your ear. But
this is, yeah, no one has the right to be not offended. In this case.
Well, I mean, if you look at the UK hate crime laws, it's let's say Adrian and I were sat at the table and Adrian said something, discriminatory against me, and someone walked past that wasn't privy to our conversation, didn't even know who we are, they can take offense on my behalf and report it, and Adrian would get a follow-up investigation.
Yeah. See, yeah,
it's crazy.
Accompanying memo clarifies offense is a subjective matter and sensitivity to it spans a considerable range. However, it is the perception of the recipient that we should consider regardless of the author's intention. Which goes directly against they talk about it here, UK Department of Education.
Oh, yeah.
Potential for offense by speech should not in itself be used to prevent lawful freedom of speech. Which is the Royal Society of Chemistry's own memo goes right against the UK's Department of Education at this point. So
yeah, I mean, it also comes down to, I think, what was happening during 2020 was the fact that, the Department of Education made it very clear in the UK legislation that teachers are not allowed to push ideological messages, and they have to be balanced. And so that was the big hoo-ha-ha about the BLM stuff that was being pushed out. That is fair enough if you want to give that point of view, but you have to give a contrasting point of view in the same fairness.
Right.
But here it's you have to be, very well versed in mind reading as well.
Yeah. And I mean, they go on to say, now I will say, I was trying to quickly find the actual guidelines document. I would have preferred to show that over the article here. And it's gone. So I think the Royal Society of Chemistry took it down.
If you've got the URL, it might have been archived.
Yeah, it might have been. And I mean, I can go find it later probably, but it's right here.
It's a Google Drive.
Well, no, I mean, this is the actual published one. But it doesn't work right because I went and it gave me a page not found error. So,
it looks like it's. Oh, you know why? It's because you see how the you have to copy and paste that whole two-liner. Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to work or not, but last time it gave me a page not found. Yeah, because now it's giving me. That's why I'm just like, yeah, it's not there anymore.
You'd have to put it into. Hang on, let me send you this link real quick.
You can put it in the private chat and StreamYard.
Yeah. If you go onto that link that I've just sent you, and then copy and paste the URL into the bottom. Yeah.
Into the bottom one?
Yeah.
Hang on. We will endeavor to do this live. Be patient with me, my friends. Ah,
Are those hashtags anything to do with it on the actual text article? You see where it says
yeah,
hashtag inappropriate?
I think it's part of the page. It goes to that particular
To,
guideline
to
note on the
content.
page.
Yeah, it's an anchor link, I think.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
think.
nothing.
Okay.
Interesting.
Oh
Okay,
well.
well,
Oh well. It used to exist anyway. And it probably is linked off the original video because I did talk about this at one point.
yeah,
A while.
someone would have archived that.
Yeah, no, somebody did. I don't doubt somebody did. Well, I hope you're not leaving yet, Rick. We're not even done. Um
He told
just
me I
kidding.
was old, and then
If
he's
you ever leave,
going.
always watch again later. You can always watch again later.
Lovely to
Um,
meet you. Thank you for coming by.
yeah. But things like this is I just wanted to point it out because it is a nope, still here. Okay, good. Um I wanted to bring that up because you do have those kinds of things too. So you're now having the complementary issues of style guides in editorial stuff and style guides in newsrooms and things like that. Although there is one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on how this would
Hmm.
be handled because yes, you have studies and what have you, and then you have the giant bloody reports. And I'm thinking specifically of things like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Assessment reports, the long bloody mouthfuls that those are. Now,
Just rolls off the tongue.
here's the fun thing, and I wonder how much journalists would know this, and that's why I'm kind of curious. Um, the reports themselves, every couple of years, hundreds of scientists get together with it, and you have three different working groups, right? You have the first working group, which is the physical science group. You have the impact group is working group 2, and then the mitigation group is working group 3. It's basically physical science, what's going on, how's the climate going to change? That's
Mhm.
where I spend most of my time. You have the impacts kind of thing, and then you have the mitigation folks. How can we prevent not the world from ending because that's not actually the way they think about it, but anyway, um, kind of thing.
And then they create Greta in a tube, and
Mhm.
all is saved.
Yeah. But each of these working groups puts out a report, and I kid you not, they are thousands of freaking pages. The actual reports are thousands of freaking pages because they are trying to synthesize every single paper on the subject that they can get their hands
Hmm.
on into one document. And then every single working group puts out technical summary, which is a bit more technical. But then there's also the one that probably most people see is called the summary for policymakers. Now, there's something funky about the summary for policymakers that people should know with that one. And it's actually on the IPCC website, so I'm not spilling anything secret.
Hmm.
Um, the big technical reports, the big full bloody ass thing, and the which are books, really. It's like three different books that they put out. And the technical summary, those are specifically just the scientists that get into those. But IPCC was created in part out of the UN. It's the World Climate Research Program, which is connected to political bodies and what have you. So when it gets to the summary for policymakers, yes, the scientists in question who are part of IPCC draft it, but then it goes to all the different diplomatic groups.
Hmm.
And there's all the diplomatic people that end up sitting in a room and they go through it line by line by line by line by line for every single one, all three of the summaries for
Yeah.
policymakers, and do critiques on it and change wording and what have you so that countries are not offended. And
Hmm.
there's a couple of colleagues I know who have been in those meetings where they'll talk about it. It's like there's one country or something like that, or one group of countries is like, we don't like this phrasing, and they'll just keep voting it down. And the thing is, until they get everybody voting in approval, it's not simple majority with that. Everybody who's there diplomatically has to vote in approval of this thing.
Yeah, I'm sure
So
China is
every
a big
single bloody line.
consideration on these things.
So what'll happen sometimes is they'll just, somebody will be like, "Hey, I need to meet with you about this," but it's everybody who's in the room who has to approve it. So if you just
Hmm.
sneak that one country out of the room for a minute, they don't
Yeah.
have to worry about it. And so that whole summary for policymakers goes through a heck of a lot of rigmarole with the diplomatic folks trying to the politest way I could say it is massage it a little bit
Yeah.
so that you don't end up offending whichever country.
Yeah.
How many journalists would know about that whole kind of a process? because this is not the only thing that would happen. IPCC is the big one that comes to mind, but there's all sorts of like giant assessment reports like that that go on with the big global organizations now. And in the US, there's, of course, we have our own for just the US kind of interest.
Yeah.
Not to the same degree of influence from politicians, actually. In the US, it's a lesser degree, which I'm fine with. Um,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But you do have those kinds of things. So, how many journalists would actually know that and know to go looking into, well, maybe some detail in here is not quite as general as the summary for policymakers, but actually has a little bit more nuance in the actual report.
Well, I think the better question is how motivated are they? Right? Because again, it always comes back to, who are they writing for? Is this because something like that is something that all publications, even if it's not their main beats, they will report on, right?
Mm.
Because it's something that, it's just a story that will have lots of implications, whether it be for, the talking points of activist groups and things like that. And so there's a lot of things, not only that, but a lot of it again is depending on where they're getting the money. If they're getting, grants from places, it could be that that's something that they want in the publications. But
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I can't talk with accuracy to this, but I would assume that how much copy do they actually have allocated to this? Is
Mm.
this going to be a DPS or is this going to be a column with 500 words?
Right.
Is it online or is it in print? Two different audiences.
Right.
And so you're going to have, there's publications out there that obviously are more orientated to this and they will probably pick it apart more. But your New York Post isn't going to do that. They'll do the headline grabbing points. Um, Again, same thing can be said about these huge big omnibus bills, right? They don't go through and pick it and things like that. A lot of the time, it's Command F, and you you find the key words you're looking for and build a story about it. Um, in the UK, usually when reports come out, so you'll have like the government reports on stuff. They'll get published, they'll be sent to the journalist, and they will spend literally all night, all through the night, reading it, and then they will put their report out.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, you've got the
I
website
just
up
put this
here,
up
but I
here just
don't.
to make the point. This is actually the process that IPCC goes through.
Yeah,
Outline drafted, panel approves outline, nominating experts as authors, often from different government organizations, because it is the intergovernmental panel, right?
yeah,
Um, Author selection, first draft review, second draft, and first draft of summary for policymakers, final draft. Um, and then the really thing is that the final draft of the SPM gets the actual extra review, which is that's the summary for policymakers, acceptance, and then publication. It's just like
yeah.
that's the short version of it, really. But it's
It
like I
makes me
don't know
wonder.
necessarily if a journalist would recognize how much this goes through before it actually gets to the public.
Yeah, and I mean, even if they are aware of that process, what is the relevance to that to them? Johnny working his 9 to 5, and he's got 4 articles to write that day for his editor before it goes to print. What's his lead? What's the lead with it? Is it
Yeah.
is it the headline points? Is it the doom fearing stuff in there, or is it the laborious,
Mm.
long, long stuff, but also to engage the audience? Is it the audience that would engage with that? But
Right.
I am interested. Is there a media page down at the bottom in the footer? Because I'm interested to know whether there are duh, 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 duh. So
I
no,
know
but I
there's a
wonder if
media page because they do have a press section.
press section, yeah. It might be under news.
Yeah. Yeah, they do have their own like media contact page and engagement with.
So usually what happens is, because there's a report of your emails out there, they'll just send it through and it'll get rerouted. So a lot of them are probably press releases.
Oh yeah,
Because
no, they
again,
just
all of
scale like
those,
that,
yeah.
I think. Yep.
So I mean, if you opened one of those, it would read like, well, a press release, but it would read like an article that's pretty much done for them, pre-packaged.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you were to copy and paste that first paragraph into Google again, I wonder how many hits you would get for something like that.
Let's find out. Yeah. We're gonna do. I won't copy all of it.
That's right.
These are all the IPCC stuff itself.
Yeah.
No,
Fair
not as
enough.
many as you'd think, actually, with this
Fair
one.
enough. But that's how you do it, right? You look at that stuff and you work out whether people are printing. Again, it goes back to, I won't rehash it now. People can go back and listen to it, but it's like I was saying about journalism. The guy that actually popularized the term journalism was a guy called Nick Davies, and he was an investigative reporter. And when he done his research into this back in 2008, he found that about 80% of the top publications in the UK, the top stories were as a result of prepackaged journalism. 80%. And it's got a little bit better recently, but again, it's pretty woefully bad still. But
Right.
that's usually how it comes about.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But yeah, it is madness, but that's usually how it gets there. And then I mean, you've got you've got ethics as well, which is
Oh yeah.
another thing where on talking about studies. In fact, actually, I tell you what, I'll share
Go
my
for it if
screen
you want to share.
because what I have here, share
I
screen
will give you the
window.
power. I have the power.
The
I will give you
power.
the
Let me,
Something
hang on.
weird about that.
I think I have, right. Sorry, I've got this new 2 screens set up and, right. I think I've got it. Right. Here we go. Here we go. So this is the digital version of this book, right?
Okay.
And they have a lot of stuff here where it's talking about choosing the stories and how you should read it. Can you read it okay, or do you want me to zoom in a little bit?
You may need to zoom in a little bit, I think.
That's right. Let me.
It's a little bit blurry on my end, and I think it's probably a little bit.
What if I?
Yeah.
No,
It's a touch blurry on YouTube, I believe. If chat can tell us if they can read any of it, please. So I think I can make it out what it is. It just looks a little bit blurry.
Well, I'll read it just in case, and we'll have a look. So it talks here about choosing stories. And it makes the point. It says news stories are aimed at the public, not scientists, doctors, investors, or policymakers. They must be useful to general readers and written in clear language, free of jargon. Now we can have an argument about that because there's a lot lost when jargon is used, because sometimes jargon is necessary. But equally, I can understand what they're saying, that it might be a bit of a block for readers.
Right. The chat is saying it is not quite sharp enough and it's a small size. So may have to go with either reading it or trying to make it a little bit larger and focusing on a page or something like that.
Yeah, let me focus on a page view, page display, single page. Right.
Yeah, and then you can zoom in a fair bit and it'll probably be.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
yes,
was
that's much better.
better? Perfect. So yeah, so they're not aimed at policymakers. They must be useful to general readers and written in clear language, free of jargon. In health and medicine, topics that affect a lot of people appeal to a larger audience than those that affect a few. Heart disease versus rare disease, unless it's a great human interest story or major advance that makes it newsworthy. Blah 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 blah. News stories should have value for readers, not just give credit to a researcher, university, or hospital. A good test, whether it would be talked about at the dinner table. When initially evaluating potential stories, here are things to look for and to look out for. So this is good because this is now telling us what a responsible journalist should do when they are presented with a press release of a story or a study or something like these. So this is more general stories, but the studies would fit in with this point. So important science usually is made public in journals or at scientific meetings where a researcher's method and results have been deemed acceptable by outside experts. A process
That
called
got
peer
ignored
review.
in the case of that alphabetism thing.
Yeah. um, that gives their findings more credibility, though rigorous checking by reporters is still essential. So again, that that's emphasized there, but at the same time, it's like we know damn well that it's seldom done,
Mm.
right? Reputable scientists rarely announce their findings solely in a press release or a press conference. And then it goes on, consider the source. Is it from an established research institution, a large reputable journal, or without peer review? Off the beaten path places and minor journals can have good science, but reporting on it requires even more care than usual. So look, I mean, you can knock the AP for all you want, but this is solid. I think you'd agree, Adrian. Like this is solid,
Yeah.
advice generally.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
And I mean, Wikipedia snippet here has a point. I don't know how many people still discuss things at the dinner table. It's a very good point.
that is a very good point. That's usually it's what's for dessert, but or who's doing the washing up.
Okay, well,
Or
I'm reading ahead. I don't know if there's anything in particular, but I noticed keep in mind scientists are not infallible. They are human with their own biases and can make mistakes even when they're very careful. I mean,
yeah,
how often does that get checked?
right, exactly.
Now,
Beware of
admittedly,
breakthroughs.
there is one instance I can think of where journalists actually caught something that was going on that was weird, and because it was a Wall Street Journal reporter who finally figured out that Pluckrose and Lindsay and Bogosian were pulling off the
Yeah,
grievous studies affair.
yeah,
It was not the peer reviewers.
yeah. It's. I mean, even this. I mean, they say health claims here, but generally, be skeptical of scientific claims on testimonials or anecdotes.
Mhm.
That should read right.
Exactly, yeah.
They are not science. Um, so it's
Well, I mean, this is
yeah,
this goes a little backwards, but you mentioned citizen journalism. There is a thing now going on that's citizen science, too,
right, yeah,
which is, I kind of look at it the same way you do with journalism in that I don't want to discourage it because, at least in history, a lot of the great scientific breakthroughs have been made by folks who were not at that time considered members of that particular field. Climate science is actually an example of this.
we
Um,
don't want to appeal to credentialism.
yeah, you don't want to
That's
feel the
yeah,
credentialism. At the same time, you want to be over careful that
yeah,
you're mentoring these people. And to the credit, there are actually a lot of citizen science programs where you're often, either paired or you have access to a way
yeah.
of mentoring with it. So they've actually done a pretty good job with it. So, but there's a similar kind of thing. But anyway, that was tangential.
No, I think it's good. I mean, there's so much that the education system, obviously for many other reasons, but lacks. But
I'm gonna, I gotta put this up here because I'm totally confused. Rick G, where the hell did that come from?
I think that I know what they're referencing, but
I don't
I'm
know what they're
confused as
referencing. I'm totally confused.
oh, the beauty of the comment section. Uh,
Which thank you guys for coming and watching. I hope you're having a good time.
yeah. But yeah, it is interesting, the way that they,
Oh, okay.
I
Thank
mean,
you, Richie. I appreciate the clarification.
ah, ah, yes, I agree. But I mean, even here, look, they're talking about the times. So they're trying to educate anyone that this should be your Bible when you're writing, and this isn't just for reporters. This is for copywriters as well.
Right.
You know, if you're writing stuff for marketing purposes, you know. But again, look, they're trying to educate people in, like,
Right.
look, they talk about the meta analysis, they talk about models, research stages,
Right.
um, which is all good stuff. Is all good
Do
stuff.
they have anything in there about preprints?
Yeah, I saw something in preprints. Where was it? Um,
I don't know if you can do a control F
Meta-analysis.
or something like that. And while you're looking for that, I'm just gonna say Wikipedia snippet. I did not know that actually about astronomy, so I may go have to look that up um,
Huh.
to confirm that. But I would not be surprised. There's very similar stories like that all throughout scientific history of things like that happening, where it was just some random guy. I mean, what was it? I think Roger Bacon, like one of the guys who came up with was fundamental in science as it is now, in history. He was a monk,
Yeah. Yeah.
which reminds me, I gotta reach out to a couple of folks, but I actually do want to do a side chat Saturday on the intersection of science and religion, um, because I think that would be a fascinating conversation to have in the historical, you know, in the differences between science and religion and their intersection and interplay in history and all that kind of thing. I think it would be a fun conversation, and it also plays into like current events and what have you because of the treating wokeness somewhat as a religion itself. Oh, hey, preprint.
Oh,
I
where
saw
did
it.
I go? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw. Hang on, maybe it's in the other. I'm wondering if it's in the other document that I had open. Hang on.
But yeah, because
Oh,
it's like all of what you've shown us so far is pretty much along the lines of like peer reviewed studies. But it's like, what do you do with a preprint? And it seems like nobody's doing their due. Yeah, I saw it right there. Uh,
yeah. Mm-mm-mm.
should be reported with extreme care.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can tell you that's not what happened.
No. And I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, even that feels a little bit too loose to me,
Mhm.
you know?
Gregor Mendel, that's another one, Rick G. Thank you. Gregor Mendel was a friar, came up with the whole theory of Mendelian genetics, which
Yeah.
then later on in history, Trofim Lysenko completely ignored because it wasn't in line with Marxism, and therefore he became one of the greatest mass murderers in scientific history. So,
Those were the days. Uh, but we have here, so again, I don't want to get too deep with this stuff, but this one is another book. So this is the Routledge Handbook of Mass Media Ethics, and it's a big chunky book. And this really is, a good guide for. I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but I assure you it's an actual legitimate phrase. But journalistic ethiks.
right.
Um,
It might be considered an oxymoron by a
yeah,
large public at this point. No offense,
but
Kieran, but it might.
I've always been an outsider with this stuff.
No,
Um,
I might consider a journalist as opposed to the journalists.
yeah, I mean, I just call them copywriters at this point because that's what they are.
There we
But
go.
this comes under, section 20, justice as a journalistic value and goal.
E.
So, I'll give them their due because this does touch on traditional definition of justice, right? Talking about corruption and things like that. But then it starts to hang on a minute. Let me do the page set up again. Display, single page. There we go. So it then starts to backtrack a little bit, or should we say progress?
Or regress.
Regress, progress. At
It's
this point,
aggressive something.
yeah, very aggressive. Um, Utilitarian-based perspectives. They talk about that, but where was it? Where is it? So it then goes on to talk about communitarian perspectives, right? So again, you have to kind of read between the lines, right? So obviously they're relating it to, the impact of a community, but we really know where this is going when it's applied,
Right.
right? So it says a third perspective on justice, communitarianism, developed in the late 20th century. Some thinkers, blah, 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 blah. So here we go. Have retracted to what they see as a negative impact of overemphasis on individualism, particularly in American society. Others, such as Michael Sandel, have argued that the very view of the person that underlines liberal political theories' emphasis on the individual is wrong. Sandel argued that Rawls viewed the self incorrectly as independent of particular aims or attachments to others and to a community. This conception of self would make people unable to make more than arbitrary choices about the principles of justice. Communitarianism undergirds a strong notion of justice by making people's connections to one another central for their lives.
Bloody freaking creepy. And on that
Yeah.
point, I'd be curious. This is a random thought, given that this is a journalistic ethics book.
Mm.
One of the principles of normative principles of scientific research is communality, not communitarianism per se, but communality, in which the idea is, generally speaking, that scientific knowledge as it's generated belongs to everybody. Now that would seem at odds with some of the things in journalism where you got to push particular perspective perhaps, or particular clicks. And so it's not the same thing. You're not saying one thing about focusing on community or self or anything like that. You're just saying if you put knowledge out there, it belongs to everybody.
Yeah, I think what I would say on that is that journalism, you shouldn't be you shouldn't be advocating. You should be, as I always say, you are a conduit
Mhm.
for the truth.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
that's what science is supposed to be too, or at least
yeah,
scientists are supposed to be, barring the insane activists, as already mentioned.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like I understand why it happens, and they're a product of the world we live in, but I do have a kind of very weird feeling in my gut when journalists become known entities. Because that runs counter to everything that I believe journalism should be. You shouldn't your name should No one should really know necessarily, or they shouldn't be household names. Um, I think as soon as you become a house, I mean, look what happened to Andy No, for example.
Mm.
He became a known entity, and now he can't go out there and do his job,
No, he gets
or
dragged.
the stuff that he would have done before, because his name was blown up so much that with me, I can go out there and I can blend in if I cover a protest, because thank God no one really knows who I am. My face isn't out there with stuff.
The curse of units. Why scientists can be wrong. Sometimes it's just not super technical. It's the curse of different units.
Mm.
It happens very much. I did not know that about the Mars Climate Orbiter. I was very young at the time, so I was just like, I couldn't have cared less. So at
That
the
makes
time,
sense, though.
that
That
does make
makes
sense that
sense.
that would be an issue.
Well, when I remember, I think it was you or Deb Philman from Reason We Learn. I was talking to over the summer. It's like, oh my, it's about 36 degrees here. They gone, and either you or Deb went, why is it so cold? And I'm like, no, Celsius.
It's the Celsius versus Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like we have that problem all the time. It's just like most of the world works in Celsius.
Well, it's weird because I do Celsius, but I also do measurements in feet and inches, and I do pounds and stone.
Yeah.
And where that comes from is I love fishing, so I go fishing, and so for me, whenever like you're weighing a fish, it's like how many pounds does the fish weigh? I've never I've never really got my head around kilograms and things like that or grams unless it's specifically for cooking. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
No.
I'm a curious contradiction.
Oh, I'll give it to you fun because the when you get into issues with wind in meteorology and oceanography, there's a fun problem of most of the time when they're working in like on technical papers and what have yous, the units they work in is meters per second.
Right.
Which then of course you might in one place translate into kilometers per hour, or in
Hmm.
the US into miles per hour,
Yeah.
or or
Yeah.
if you're dealing with folks on the ocean, as is often the case with oceanography, no, you'll have to change it into knots or
Yeah.
into nautical miles per hour, which are totally different things. It's just like insanity. But yes, our neighbors in Canada use Celsius too. We notice.
Look, I'm not usually as a libertarian. I'm not one for top down
Yeah,
approaches,
you
but
got a question here for you. Not related.
I think think it's 13. Yeah, I think there's 13 stone to a pound. Sorry,
13.
13 pounds to a stone. Sorry. God, tells you how long it's been since I've trod on the weighing scales.
Yeah. No. Okay. Sorry. I we went off on a tangent. Please continue.
No, I was just saying, as a libertarian, I don't usually advocate for top-down, approaches for things. But my God, can we just have one universal thing for measurements?
Oh gosh, what is it? There is a name for it. There is actually a universal measurement thing that is supposed to be what you do all your units in if you're doing like research and communicating it internationally. I
Mm,
forget the name of it. The acronym is SI units. They're
right.
they're the standard units, and it's things like Celsius and meters, and it is mostly in the metric system, which drives the
Ah,
Americans crazy. That is but oh gosh, what is the name of it? I can't remember. Please continue. I'm gonna look it up because it annoys me.
yeah. I was just thinking because it's like other things as well. Like when I've got blood tests back from the doctors or something, and I'm looking at whether they're in the normal range. Because like over here, we have like different normal ranges for things on your blood test than the Americans do. And so when I'm like reading research into
The
things and
International
trying,
System of Units.
ah,
It's abbreviated SI, which makes no damn sense, but
it's another confusion. We just got over one hurdle.
System International in French. Yeah, that
Right. Right. I'll remember
makes
that.
more sense. Thank you, Rick G.
It's currently 5 SI out there at the moment. I don't know whether that's correct, but it's
No,
cold, put it that way.
the SI unit for temperature is Kelvin, which is
Oh yes.
Celsius plus
Yes.
273.15.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. No, yeah. But no, it's like when you do like the measurements of things in your blood, whether it be different things. It's like nanomoles,
Mhm.
um, and but then there's like a different unit as well. So like I'm going on the ridiculous units we have over here, and a terrible health system we have over here, and getting my printouts from that, which you have to fight for. They don't give it to you. You have to like you know almost
They
you
don't want
almost
to kill trees.
no, well, they just don't want to. They don't want to give you any control over your health. So you have to like meet a man in a dark alley with a trench coat. Have to give him your information. He'll give you your blood, your blood information or your medical records. Absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, so you'll get them, and then because I'm a control freak, so I like to know what's going on with me. So I'm reading all these studies about different things with what it could mean, how I can improve stuff. But because they're American, medical journals, they're all in American medical, measurements and stuff. And I'm like, I just give up. I'm dying.
Oh goodness. That
But
was a tangent that we went down with the confusion of units.
it was indeed. But
But it
well, I
is a
will.
problem because that's a journalistic thing you have to deal with too. Because I'm sure a lot of studies end up being in
What happens
essays.
if you're an international publication?
Yeah,
What happens if you are doing something and you're getting a press release from a US publication? You haven't got that technical editor to say that, oh, this is what it means. In fact, I'm wondering. I won't look right now because I don't think I'll be able
no, you can
to
find it later.
find it. But I am interested to see whether there is anything. Oh, I've just opened up the page and the first entry I've got is misinformation. Should we see what the AP says about misinformation?
Which, I'll tell you what, there's a whole school of scholarly thought on mis and disinformation now. But what's
And I
interesting
bet
about
all of it is misinformation.
that? But they don't ever say what it is. They don't ever
No.
get a clear definition of misinformation or disinformation. It's
Right, but the thing is, though,
hysterical.
is I mean, misinformation and disinformation are real things, and it's got a very simple definition. Misinformation is incorrect information.
Yeah.
Disinformation is intentional.
Yep.
It's
It's a
like
lie.
muddying the water. Yeah,
It's a lie, essentially.
exactly.
Can we just say what it is? It means you're lying.
Exactly. Yeah, one, you're incorrect. The other one, you're lying.
That's really what it is. We do not need. Okay, this is minorly tangential. This whole conversation is reminding me of George Carlin's rant on political correctness.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, you haven't seen that? I'll have to send it to you because it's
Yeah.
absolutely hysterical.
But yeah,
God bless him. He
maybe
went off in this whole long rant, and he was talking about how we make words longer so they sound less devious or less straight to the point or something like that. So it's just like he went off about it. Is one of my absolute favorite rants of his. May he rest in peace.
But I tell you what, though, I mean that feeds into the point here, right? It says that you need to make stuff jargon free. Yet at the same time, why aren't we using lie and incorrect statement rather than misinformation and disinformation? I mean, it's almost as if all of this is disinformation. Let's
Soft
see what.
language. Thank you. Yes, that's what it's called. It's George Carlin's rant on soft language.
You'll have to send that through to me. I'm gonna watch that. So let's see what the AP says. So it's under the section misinformation, fact checkers, fake news. Fake news. The term misinformation refers to false information shared about a particular topic that could be mistaken as truth. God forbid. It can include honest mistakes, exaggerations, and misunderstandings of facts, as well as disinformation, which refers to misinformation created and spread intentionally as a way to mislead or confuse. Misinformation can be transmitted in any medium, including social media, websites, printed materials, and broadcast. It includes photography or video and audio recordings that have been created, manipulated, or selectively edited. The term typically excludes opinions as well as satire and parody. Well, our friend is good with that one then. It does include hoaxes, propaganda, and fabricated news stories. When used broadly, the term misinformation is preferable to the term fake news. The term fake news may be used in quotes or as a shorthand for deliberate falsehoods or fiction masked as news. There's a whole other section on it. Like they've dedicated a whole entry to it. So yeah, it is quite something, this book. You'll always find something in here. And again, bear in mind that this is the I'm poor, so I've only got the 2020 to the 2022 version. The new version has come out, and I'm interested to see how woke they've got with the new version. So they've got here. Oh, they've got measurements. They've got here about the metric system. They've got an entry. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent. I will after this one. This will be my last one, I promise. They've got here hashtag me too.
Our audience would be pissed off with us if they were annoyed with all the tangents. But anyway.
Oh, we've got so many tangents. Like if someone was to be drawing our conversation as a line drawing at the moment, it would just be one scribble on a page. That should be an art form. every time we interview or individually or people do, you just do a line drawing. Every time a line goes off, and then they're NFTs at the end of it. This is my conversation with beautiful. But they've got an entry here, #MeToo, #MeToo movement.
Right.
The entry reads, aims to hold accountable those involved in sexual misconduct and those who cover it up. And then they've got ones here. So it really, it covers everything. They've got an entry here for Merck & Co., headquarters in Kenilworth, New Jersey. It's like there's got so many weird and wonderful entries. Messer Air Group Incorporated. But anyway, I'll leave that there because that's a fun little book.
Well, I can see a question. It's up to you whether or not you want to answer it. Because it's a little bit touchy.
Should we ever take journalists seriously when they release private communications to smear people? I don't believe that journalists. Well, let's take this on face value, shall we? So one has to define smear, and obviously it's very specific and anchored within the specific situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Journalists, no, I don't think. But if journalism isn't a monolith, right? They're individuals that do this, and private communications. Well, it depends, right? I mean, think of Project Veritas, right? They release private communications. Now, under journalistic ethics, that is a perfectly, because it's in the public interest, right? Think of whistleblowers. That's public interest. If there is a public interest element to it, then I think it's perfectly legitimate. One would have to demonstrate it was a smear. Smear, to me, I would have to, just because I want to talk very precisely on this, because it is an important question, I want to just be sure on the definition of smear. To spread or no. Smear. An attempt to harm someone's reputation by publicly accusing them of something that is unpleasant, unreasonable, or unlikely to be true. So that's the definition of smear. So I guess it would be down for the journalist to have all their ducks in a row and make sure that they have irrefutable evidence on something. But yeah, I mean, public interest, because there are laws in place, right? There's defamation and things like that. So yeah, I don't agree with the premise, because if one person does it, they don't speak for all journalists. It would discredit them as an individual if they didn't have their ducks in a row. So yeah, that's my answer on that one.
Okay. But
do you get my point? Do you get my point with that?
Yeah, no, I get your point with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a valid question. It's a valid question. Because there are a lot of people that will target people, and I mean, look at news media, where they will go and they will, they will basically find any angle, but then when under pressure, they can't provide any evidence to back up those claims. And usually, I mean, look at what they've done with James O'Keefe, right? I mean, he's got his, what does he call it? His wall of shame or something. I forget what he calls it.
It's the wall of retractions or something
right.
like that.
Exactly. If there's no evidence, then that completely delegitimizes anything. But then that would be for the other party to, prove that was incorrect. So I don't know whether you want to interject on anything. I was going to bring up this just to tip you off of what this was. This is the ethics handbook, and this is the one that was talking about this is where the kind of, dare I say, the intersection of wokeness, studies, and science and journalism come together. It is like the holy trifecta. Um, but it. So this here is talking about what do they call it? Sorry, this is really taking me. Works discussing moral development theory. So yeah, so it's talking about talking about the place priority on justice as a universal ethical principle. Again, I argue that justice should be a byproduct of good reporting, not the sole aim of reporting.
Right.
If you go out, like for example, if there is a story where a company's dumping, poisonous substances into a stream, and the community downstream from that is, having kids with birth defects and things like that, your job should be you should be motivated by exposing the corruptness and all of that stuff. But then the end result of that is, out of that story comes justice for the parties involved. You shouldn't be there to seek justice for them. Then you become an advocate.
Right. Right.
That's yeah.
And that is the problem. You do become an advocate for these kinds of things, and you're not interested in pursuing what is actually true and correct and what have you. And that presents a problem, right? Because you're not providing this to the public generally to make good decisions with it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I keep harping on it, because you do have some young scientists who have been taught, we're gonna go out and change the world with science, kind of thing. And you're gonna like, what is it?
Yeah.
It's a particular field. It's called participatory based action research. And the specific quote about what the field is, I'd have to go dig it out again, but the specific quote about what the field is, they basically say their goal is to understand the world by changing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about all the
Mm-hmm.
problems with that statement. That's why you have to be really careful with some of the fields and where do they come from and what are the origins, and go back to some of their fundamental documents about this is why we go about doing what we do. How can you possibly understand if you're changing the world? How do you know you're changing it to something that is good or better, or if you're not changing it into a bad direction, if your only goal is to change it and you don't understand it first?
Yeah, I would argue I don't think the outcome is necessarily considered. It's the fact of change,
Yeah.
the process of change, whether it be destruction, whether it be you know
Right.
building things or reinventing things. It's the
Mhm.
progressivism, really,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, and participatory based action research has a close relationship with something called actionable science, which you're going to see more often show up, because actionable science, the idea with it is that you're doing studies and research that are directly beneficial to somebody who's not a scientist, which is to say you're not doing science entirely for science's sake. You're doing
Hmm.
it to also help, like somebody's making a decision somewhere about something, and so you're doing answering a research question that's relevant to them just as much as it's relevant to you.
Yeah.
um on the whole, I've always thought that concept to be very good, but it does open the door to being pushed into activism, and then that activism being sold as science to journalism and pushed out there, which whole lots of issues with potentially destroying credibility of science, which still today, you can look at this like Pew Research and what have you. Still today, scientists are among the most trusted group of people in the country, according to polling. As much as you, as much as you take that with a grain of salt,
Yes.
kind of thing. It's still there like that. So I'm also cognizant of public perception of scientists, and media feeds into that. You know,
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think just like reporters can go and pick the stories they want to do if they're advocating, like the example I gave with the pollutants and stuff like that. You end up having these scientists that I is it wrong for me to basically I don't want to say scientists as one big category,
Mhm.
because I think it is younger scientists that are fresh out of the sausage factory that have a stronger proclivity to these to these
Why did you say that? Because now I'm gonna think
ah,
that when I go academia, the sausage factory.
you're just going to see them as, little hot dogs walking around. Oh gosh. Um but yeah, I mean, and this is the thing, but it almost feeds into that whole thing of, the question around what was it again? Because it was a random divergent.
It was around whether or not, whether or not we should trust journalists when they release private communications for smears, I think is what.
That was it, Karen. Yeah. So you know, the thing is it kind of feeds into that, not necessarily the specifics, because I mean that sounds like it. There's a specific point that I'm not quite getting with that, and it sounds like a very specific case that they're referring to, but the essence of that is still applicable, right? Because it comes down to the point of trusting that the stuff that is coming out, is there an agenda,
Right.
right? And is that individual doing what I think science is about, is going where the evidence takes them?
Mm,
Or do they do this thing that we all know too well, is you have the end point, but you just have to get there,
right.
right? And so are they picking things again that are social, and that's another thing, right? There's nothing wrong with studying stuff that's in the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing things that are, again, it's tricky because it's hard to differentiate with this, but it's different when you are then going to do stuff because it is, uh, oh, the phrase I'm trying to use is, you become the propaganda arm of or the research arm
Right.
of your movement,
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
right? Because you've got I'm sure the propaganda department, right, in the CCP or Soviet Russia, right? Those were specialist people that knew what they were doing because they had the skills to do that.
Right.
And effectively, if you're someone that has strong skills when it comes to research and doing scientific study, you lend your skills to the cause.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit of a messy way of saying it, but I think you get my gist.
Yeah. No,
I
I
hope.
do. I get the gist of it for sure. In here, and I was just checking Twitter on something. Real quick. Sorry, pops across the radar. Anyway,
But
so yeah, it's unfortunate that it goes that way, though.
it is, and it's a
But
it's a
it's a
detriment.
very subtle but important distinction that doesn't get talked about enough when we're, and I think I talked about this with the pushing the solutions, with the pushing the solutions video earlier this week. When we're talking about training the next generation of scientists, journalists, what have you, we're not talking to them about that distinction between, I already know what I want the world to be, and therefore I'm going to go search for things that confirm that kind of thing,
Hmm.
or I don't know what the world is kind of thing, and
Yeah,
I'm gonna figure it out. That's a
yeah,
very subtle but important distinction because one of them pushes you in the activist direction and the other pushes you in the truth seeking direction. And that's two very, very different things, whether it be journalism or not. And this journalism thing has a whole hell of a lot of activism in it from from what I'm reading. I see your highlight here, and I don't want to take away from that.
yeah. I mean, before I get on, all I will say is that and I've had some people push back because they identify as activists, but who am I to say yay or nay on whether they are or not? But as a general rule, I don't like the term activist,
Mhm.
I don't believe the people that identify as activists that I know are actually definitionally or ideologically activists. They're something else. They're change makers. They're, there's a different term for them, because if you're an activist, activists in themselves, they require a suspension of reality in a sense,
Mm.
right? And I had a good friend of mine is actually she's old school Antifa, right? So and so this is really interesting. Like, I've got lots of friends across the spectrum, and it's interesting because at the end of the day, we can have a bottle of wine and part as friends, but fiercely disagree.
Oh yeah.
And she said to me that she was brought up in a commune in the Netherlands. So she's Dutch, and she was saying that you know she was definitely a hardcore activist, but she admitted the fact that to be an activist, you can't entertain any facts or information that threaten your
Yeah.
core goals,
Yeah.
right? Because let's say, for example, everything that we're fighting for, you know, you would call you, or people would call you, an activist for truth and reason within science, right? And, but I would argue no, because to be an activist, if someone said to you in a reality in the upside down, where they said, Adrian, actually, you're empirically wrong, and this is, you would then have to be able to sit there and go, oh, you know,
Process it. Yeah.
yeah. And the fact that, but the fact that you can process all of these different things and still, it still bakes into your equation, and you can still go about things and you can learn and absorb that, to me says it's not an activist, because that information would threaten the very existence of your mission,
Oh yeah.
right? And so and so yeah, it is tricky with the activism, because then it brings yeah, it has but I mean, in regards to what you were saying about the activism in science, I mean, it boils down to that. You have an idea in mind of your you have your theory, and you build a reality around it.
Mhm.
Now, there's plenty of ways to get to your end result,
Oh yeah.
plenty of ways. But so this here is, it's talking about moral development theory and all of this. So it won't get too heavy. But it's how people develop their, thinking about ethical matters. In particular, scholars have drawn Kohlberg work, which places priority on justice as a universal ethical principle. Some of them have contrasted it with the work of feminist scholars Carol Gilligan, who emphasizes care of the interaction of people in relationships, right? So this is effectively, again, let's contextualize this. This is in the Routledge Handbook of Mass Media Ethics, right? So
Mm.
this is should be the thing that underlines ethics of people in mass media, right? And so this is kind of talking about the things that you should consider, or the conversations around it. And so here it gets on to, it says, it found that where should we start? Let's do Wilkins and Coleman used defining issues test, which was influenced by Kohlberg's framework to evaluate how journalists think through ethical decisions. In relation to other professions previously studied, journalists rated relatively high on moral reasoning levels via scores on the test. So again, that was done in 2015, or at least the,
Right.
the paper came out in 2015. So I don't know how old the data is, because the industry has changed, the
It's
cohort has
probably like
changed.
10 odd years old at this point.
Yeah. The study included 12 moral exemplars in journalism, along with 12 in public relations. Found their scores were higher than the average for journalists previously studied. He pointed out that this meant that they showed a consistent ability to draw on post-conventional reasoning.
Mm.
Wilkins and Coleman, though, reported a disturbing finding from a study of students using a test of moral judgment, moral outrage. White journalism
I
majors.
have a high amount of questions about what that test of moral judgment is, so I may have to try that study just for my own laughs.
Oh yeah. So again, these are kids that are still in university, right?
Mm-hmm.
White journalism majors were significantly more likely to use lower levels of ethical reasoning when evaluating photos that showed black rather than white people. What's interesting, though, in this book, you notice how it's capitalized.
Yeah.
You don't usually see, you see black, and I done a whole podcast on this, that this is political black.
Yeah.
That's not black the color, that's not black the identity, but that's the political identity. That's a container for what it means to be black. Spurred by his findings, the author called for a renewed emphasis on social justice in the teaching of journalism ethics. Now, it's unclear, I'll be honest with you, it's unclear as to whether this is, the social justice that we all know and love, or whether this is
All
traditional.
sarcasm intended.
Yeah, oh yeah. Or this is kind of like traditional, you know, pulls on social justice issues.
Yeah, yeah.
Unsure, but I'm getting a theme here that it's the former. That's what I'm thinking. So it says black journalism majors showed no significant difference in levels of reasoning, regardless of the race of the subjects, and the same was true for black, Asian Americans, and Hispanic professional journalists. So basically, all white journalism majors are racist, but all of the others, absolutely tickety boo. Style note.
Is this a style note? I think is what is being asked, which is not. It's the Handbook of Ethics, right?
Yes. So again, this is the Handbook of Mass Media Ethics. So it's a Routledge publication. So I don't know a better way of saying it, that it's very prestigious publishing for academic books. Would I be correct in saying?
It basically forms the ethics that journalists are taught, right?
But Routledge, I'm saying Routledge as a publisher, like they're seen as quite a prestigious academic publishing.
But would you say this is something that would be used in academia to teach journalists?
Yeah, so it'll be one of. So I mean, it's written by a professor of the Missouri School of Journalism and Wayne State University, and then another lady by Clifford G. Keep falling out my ear. G. Christians is a research professor of communication, professor of media studies, and professor of journalism emeritus at the University of Illinois. So that's where my degree is, media studies.
I see.
So that's the ethics book. Again, I got this. I didn't get this in school. This was something that I got after the fact because I'm interested in ethics and doing the right thing. But this is the style book. So this is what we were looking at earlier with all of the different entries with, you know, how to write like a good ideologue. But yeah, so this is talking about how social justice should be situated as the core theme, basically, when writing about stories and things. Again, it's unclear as to whether this is the modern social justice ideology, or critical social justice, as it should be called, or whether it's the, you know, traditional social justice, which still has its issues, but, you know, it's more widely accepted as to what you think is good social justice, should I say.
Exactly.
And then it goes on.
To bring it back for a moment, I thought part of the reason for looking at these things, because I'm thinking of topic of the day, is aside from the issue that we talked about, like, of course, there's a lack of funding, and technical editors and development editors and things like that get dropped. There's also journalists who are coming out having learned stuff like this, and then also having to filter whatever studies they get through that framework, or in the omission kind of thing that tends to happen, looking for studies that fit that particular framework. So that's the point to make with this, to bring it back to a little bit more to the topic because we did go off into it there.
Yeah, this is kind of doing this is kind of looking at the context of how the origin story for a lot of this mess.
Right.
And ultimately you've got people that are unfortunate, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, that I mean this is a neutral statement, but you have the majority of people are media illiterate. And you've then got journalists or reporters or writers that are technically illiterate
Right.
because they are, and I don't blame them, they're on staff as generalists. They could be writing about Madonna's new tour on Wednesday, and then on Friday they're talking about, studies on masks for the coof.
Or
you know
or actually there was a whole other study that I saw about treating pneumonia with robots, but that's a whole other thing.
exactly. And that was what Clive, after a bottle of whiskey the night before, went, oh, I've got a deadline tomorrow, I need to do something. And he opens up his emails and he goes, oh, robots, pneumonia.
Yeah.
And he goes, I wonder if I could find a study. And he's like, oh, I'm just going to have a look. He'll find a study. There's always a study.
Oh,
But that's the thing, right? It's you start with the premise, and then you find, and then it's everything's in reverse to how it should be,
right.
right? You
Oh,
should get this.
this is unrelated, but before I forget, I did find the soft language rant from George Carlin, so I will save that because those of
Beautiful.
you who know, we go to locals after this, and Kieran's kindly offered to join us, so I will save it as something fun to do on locals alongside of just answering some of these questions.
Definitely. Yeah, if you want to pick my brains on anything, then please feel free. But the final point I will make with this is that the last point on here was it talks about some contradictions here. So it's a Steiner and Oakrush, I feel like my teeth are falling out. Criticized a justice-based model for journalism built on rights, what they see as prevailing ethical foundations for journalism in the United States as too thin.
Mm-hmm.
And explored the contribution of care to the strengthening of journalism ethics, urging journalists to care towards justice.
What the hell does that mean?
We could maybe in the after show we'll go to page 116 and just have a quick perusal. Yeah. They suggested that public journalism has already melded the two and argued that incorporation of some revised ethic of care would help revitalize a stronger and more philosophically and politically defensible concept of justice and human rights. Right. And then I think this is the last thing I got highlighted, but I loved it. Justice as a framework for journalistic decision making.
What a mess.
Yeah, I think that's all I have on that. But it is
this kind of sausage making is actually, a lot of people don't see it, but they need to see it because then it helps you understand why so many things are screwed up.
Yeah. And I tell you something, these things are so important to familiarize yourself with, because pretty much every single thing that you read that is from a professional outlet or from a professional outlet will be informed by this or some form of it. And there is, as I said, there is, the trans style guide. And so there's so many different versions of these style guides. And again, I mean, that really dictates a lot of the conversation around the trans issues.
Right.
So the point is that it's not necessarily correct,
right,
to be saying that, oh, it's just hang on, what have I done here? Oh, you got it? I think I just shared the window.
Oh, yes, I see it now. Oh, zoom in a fair bit though, because it's.
Let me have a look.
Because it's teeny, teeny, teeny. There we go. That's better.
So again, tell me if I'm dominating the time, because but it's just like
No, no,
there's
no, no,
so
no.
much to
The
talk
only
about
the
with
only other
this.
major thing that I want to get to is
Mm,
that, of course, we've hit news media. The only other major thing I really want to get to is the
mm.
actual just scientists going straight to social media and what kind of problem that is.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's the only
Do
other
you
one I
want?
want to get to here eventually. So I'm fine. Y'all let us know if we're just rambling.
Yeah, we're
That
just two friends having a chat, and because
is
that's
exactly
the
the point of SciChat Saturdays, is we
but
just
that's
get
the thing. That's
chatting
that's
about
the
things.
that's the tricky disconnect, because you can't necessarily see people. You forget that there's people there, so we just talk and have a good time. It's for them
Well,
to rein us in.
Bart here just said your previous thing was what was it? Just Orwellian gobbledygook.
Yeah,
I think
that's a
the
good
proper
that's a
phrase
good
is
t-shirt.
gobbledygook, but anyway.
I might have that as I might make that as a t-shirt for Woke Screen. Just Orwellian gobbledygook. I'll have like a jam jar or something like I've got for my culture jam, and I'll just call it. I'll do a label on the side. Just Orwellian gobbledygook,
There you go.
or gloop. Augustus Orwellian.
Gobbledygook.
Anyway, I'm going on a tangent here. I haven't eaten today. Anyway,
Jesus
so
Christ, you haven't had food.
no, I had coffee. I had some porridge because,
Oh,
as I said, I'm a 90-year-old. Anyway, I digress. So
no, you're not. You're
this.
10.
Oh yes, 10 plus 18. So the reason I bring this up is, again, we're going deeper into things rather than looking at it as a general point. But as I was saying, I cannot impress enough how important these are to frequent yourself with. But it's not the only one. There's style guides for specific topics. There's eco style guides. There's so many different things. But the Trans Journalist Association style guide, right? So it gets good. It gets real good. So, guidance on improving trans coverage. 1.1, guidance on diversifying newsrooms. Now, I'll be honest with you. Some of this I agree with.
Okay.
On a pinch. Newsroom and sources to improve coverage. Hire trans reporters, editors, and leadership. The number one way to improve trans coverage is to hire trans people, because the lived experiences, trans reporters often have a much deeper and more nuanced understanding of trans issues and gender than even the best cis reporters. Trans journalists have a greater access to the trans community and can more easily gain the trust of trans sources. Now, this is the bit I agree with. I will give them something with that. Being the trans community is so well, you've got one bit where they're completely against all of this stuff, but they're kind of in fight or flight mode because they know that they're going to be smeared left, right, and center. Then you've got the other ones that are just part of the Borg.
Right.
So you kind of need an insider
Yeah.
to pose as, and the thing is this isn't, let's step
Right.
outside of the trans topic here. You have this is when embedding journalists into war zones.
Right. Yeah.
If you go to Africa, it's better to have a black reporter rather than a white reporter that's reporting on something. It's just common sense. Same as if you're reporting on the Taliban, you're better off having a male reporter than a woman reporter.
Yeah.
It's just, and these are things that are decided at an editorial level and should be part of legitimate, planning. And so this is where I agree with it. Hiring lived experiences. Now, this is the bit where we talk about bias, right? This is what I mean. They're bringing biases to things. Now, I could turn this into an argument of benefit. I could say that maybe when they're reporting on stuff, they might know about topics within that community that maybe the generalist reporter doesn't, which could give them a scoop.
Mm-hmm.
Right there's an argument there. But the way they phrased it, lived experiences, much deeper and more nuanced understanding of trans issues, gender than the. Well, what about this cis reporter? What if they're an expert and they've done more reading, yet the bloke that just puts on a dress, right, has just discovered he's trans 6 months ago? But this cis reporter has been embedded with this community and have been doing stuff for the past 12 years. Just being a member of a group does not give you the authority or the or the expertise to talk for them, right? Additionally, many underrepresented groups face an uphill battle when it comes to improving coverage of their communities because newsrooms lack diverse editors and leadership. No BS. If there's a story, there's a story. And they should only be following story, not advocacy.
Right.
Newsrooms must do better to prioritize diversity. It's necessary to include trans people in that diversity. No, it should be skill. Sorry, but yeah, meritocracy. Talk to trans people about trans people. Hi, Dave. Let's talk about trans people. Like, when reporting
And
a story about...
I'm sorry, this is a tangent
Yeah.
just in terms of stupid studies that came out from YouGov. I did not know this came out. But apparently it's making the rounds a second time, is apparently Americans are more confident than the British that they could beat an animal in a fight.
Oh, I remember this study.
Because apparently one of the things that was put in here was a gorilla, and apparently 8% of Americans think they can beat up a gorilla.
I think the nearest the UK has got to having to hand-to-hand combat with an animal.
2% of your British colleagues there think they can beat up a gorilla. So
yeah, but the nearest that we've got in the UK of going hand-to-hand combat with an animal is Friday night at the pub. Seen some of the blokes and women that go into those places and come out.
it's
You
even
think
better.
you've walked into a gorilla.
8% of Americans in this thing. I'm sorry, it's a total tangent, but 8% of Americans in this thing think they can beat up an elephant.
Wow. When it's subdued and on the floor, or wow.
Where did this was a YouGov thing, apparently.
Of course it was. Of course it was.
Who thought to ask this? This is one of the things. Sometimes with science, you have very stupid questions, and you have stupid articles that come out in news media because of stupid questions.
But journalists love this, and that's why they get published. It all feeds in. It all feeds in.
It does. I mean, I clicked on it. Let's put it this way.
Yeah. I just honestly, but yeah,
I see what you're saying about it, and it's a lot more nuanced than anything. But it does feed into the same kind of thing. Is that sometimes it's going to be easier to understand and report on a scientific story if you have a journalist who perhaps has some of that knowledge background, or at least has a technical editor that they can go to.
Right, exactly. It goes back to our underlying, point that having expertise in the subject that you're writing about will put you ahead of somebody that doesn't, and that's what that should really translate to.
Right.
But I mean, this one is just ridiculous, where it says talk to trans people about trans people. When reporting a story about trans issues, trans people should be interviewed and quoted as experts. So Michelle, that's been in her bedroom and decided that she's trans 2 days ago after watching, too many Twitch streams, she's an expert over, somebody else. That it does not make sense. And this is where you get all of these crappy bits of information. Right. Trans people are the experts on trans lives and experiences. Their voices should be centered on this coverage. A cis person will rarely have better insight. Well, it depends. Trans people are often the leaders in research on trans communities. I mean, this bit is great. There are cis experts worth quoting within specific specialities. However, when you write about trans issues, do not include more experts who are cis than trans. Equity, baby, equity.
Yeah, but I think we can go from this here as this is being a mess.
Yes.
And these kinds of things, and it's not the only thing. I mean, if I can find it, I'll give you a counterpoint because of some crazy stuff that shows up in STEM. I talked about this in a video, but there is this kind of thing. Wait a minute, where is it? The thing called QuantCrit, which
you
is
don't want to say that too quickly.
Yeah, which is a whole discipline, that this is what happens. Quant crit researchers take as fact that structural racism and sexism plague the U.S. economic, political, and educational systems.
Okay, so you've just admitted in that one sentence that your whole field is bogus.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that is the admitted thing here, and this is just generally speaking the tenets here that they have.
I mean, at least put that in a closing paragraph to string me along for a little bit.
Right, it's all built off of that. They just assume whenever they get it here, they don't. Like when discussing causes of inequities, quant crit researchers don't have to speculate about the causes by a priori stating that the causes are racist, sexist, and classist power structures. Researchers can focus their discussion on identifying mechanisms and impacts of these oppressive structures. There is no search for the truth. There is no search for why in those kinds of things.
So go back to the that opening sentence, and I'm going to rephrase it and see whether it passes muster for any other statement like this. Quant crit researchers take the fact that gravity is not real. I mean, would you?
Okay, you're reminding me of a hoax paper.
Oh,
one of the original hoax papers, because years and years and years ago, a guy named Sokol found the social justice studies, the grievance studies groups to be awful and what have you, and he wrote that hoax paper about how gravity is not real. I kid you not, it does exist.
Wow.
I have to go find it and talk about it, but it is actually a real thing.
I just can't. I mean, you're just telling me that, it's almost like, I'm not going to say that word because I'm going to get you a strike.
Yeah, please.
But no, I won't. But it's almost like admitting up front that they believe that pink unicorns are real, and therefore this is the grounding of all their further research. As I said, at least put it in the closing paragraph so you can at least string me along for a little bit. As soon as I read that, I'm not reading anymore.
Yeah, but everything else, I harped on this when I did a video about it, but everything else is based off of that singular premise. Singular first tenet of their ideology here. And I will give you even more. It's just to remind people. I will go show you, because it's down here at the end. Congratulations. National Science Foundation owns this. If you're a taxpayer in the United States, congratulations, you're paying for this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to attempt to say this name. Bart de Boisblanc.
Where?
In the comments.
Oh, yes.
Did I get it right?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask him.
But yeah, I mean, he puts a very valid point. Postmodernism premise is there is no truth. It's your truth or his truth or my truth. And that's the thing. Anyone that says that there is no objective reality is not a person to be taken seriously in my estimation. Yeah. And the thing is, and I always say this, that I kind of rephrase this a little bit to give a little bit more credence to the critiques of objective reality. But I make the point that there is my view, your view, and the objective reality. We can all perceive things differently, but that does not mean that there is not an objective reality independent of our perception.
See, like if my truth is that you don't exist, doesn't make it true.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that. None of this is real.
You're sitting in the Matrix.
Yeah, but it's like, that's the thing. Is this cup full or empty?
Well, if you're going with the Schrodinger's cat premise.
Oh, I'm not. That's probably a terrible crossover. Let's go with the Kieran's cup theory.
It's Kieran holding a cup.
Exactly. And I could pick this up. There's a lot of cues that you could take. Like I could pick it up and, you might look at my hand and realize that, my muscles maybe are flexing in a way that, looks like I'm carrying something heavy, or, the way I'm being careful with it. And you may deduce from that that this is full, so maybe I'm being careful with it, right? I can see that it's not. But that's your perception. Someone else might look at that and go, "Oh, it's empty because, it's not up to the rim, so I think it's empty." You both have different views,
This is
but the objective
you're unfortunately going in the direction of the half full, half empty argument.
yeah, well, I just the drink doesn't last long enough for me to make that conclusion. Uh,
Okay, but yeah, I wanted to I wanted to bring this up because there are things like this that are going on. This is not we've hit on some really bad examples. This is not to say there's not good scientists. There's not to say there's not good
no.
journalists and things like that. And that's actually what I want to wrap it around so that we can get to the other argument because it's dawning on me we've been going for almost 3 hours.
Oh, it's been great. It's been great. My bum is numb, but yeah, apart from that, it's great.
But I wanted to get back around to this because one of the reasons I got to point this out is because, like, the heterodox STEM community, full disclosure, I'm in part of the community. There's a whole bunch of good scientists over there, and that's what they wrote the article. One of them wrote the article that gave rise to wanting to have this discussion to begin with. Recent studies show and the rise of Twitter science, whole different category problem. So now you've got the whole, you have the technical studies go through the filtration of news media and what have you. We've had that problem for ages and ages and ages. Now, of course, with the rise of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the rest coming into play here, you now have a totally different problem where you can just have scientists go straight and push their studies straight into mass media. And I think there was a couple of points here. I'm going to have to see if I remember where exactly they are because it's been a while. Oh, yes. Okay. The reason this came up is there was a preprint courtesy examining the National Science Foundation's grant funding decisions. Because the National Science Foundation is a federal agency in the United States that awards grants to different universities and professors to do funding. And this preprint was Decades of Systemic Racial Disparities in Funding Rates at the National Science Foundation. Chen et al. 2022. I think it has since been published. I do not know for sure, so others may have to check me on that one. The announcement was followed by a large number of retweets proclaiming that this is amazing work and that something needs to be done about the National Science Foundation's grant funding process. The main author of the study also tweeted out a message about the paper saying to read it and think about it, both of which I did, referring to the author of this piece. I came to the conclusion that this preprint and its accompanying social media hype highlight the danger of just saying studies show without understanding what a given study can or cannot really show, and are an indication of what I call of the rise of what I call Twitter science, as I describe in this essay. And I think a lot of folks may, if you're an expert in your own field, and you may have this anecdote come to you every so often. I know I have this with the climate stuff that I do deal with. I get more of this than I care to admit. I'm often asked by my non-scientist family members and friends for my opinion about a new science result they just heard about on the media, Facebook or Twitter. Often these stories begin, scientists prove or scientists show. We've talked a lot ad nauseum about that. When I look at the actual scientific paper being highlighted, I find that sometimes it is something that is simply cute or amusing, but not exactly groundbreaking. This is why you need to dig in and just not read the headlines. This is, I mean, I appreciate the notion of, what you're talking about is that you need some mentorship or what have you. It's one of the reasons I do this with my channel is just like, here's how I, as I'm thinking about this as a scientist, read a study so that you can have something to work with to say, here, this is how you should go look for these things. Check out the methods. Don't just ignore the methods. I think I've seen every like if you Google how to read a science article, you will probably find just read the abstract, the introduction, and the conclusions. No, read the methods, because if the methods are flawed, then the conclusion isn't worth crap, even if it supports what you think is correct. Yeah. And this is something that gets ignored by the journalists too, because they just don't know. You don't know the nitty gritty of the method, right?
The thing is that the cake might look nice with all its icing on everything, but unless you read the method, you don't know whether they substituted, sugar for salt, because they both look the same, and the cake ends up looking the same afterwards. You have to read the method to realize, what actually went in it.
I didn't see this until now. Do you have a coffee cup or a donut?
Well, I wish I had a donut. I am the token donut here.
Oh. Let's see. Other times it is clear that what is presented in the news report, post, or tweet is not actually what the paper was saying. Yes. Another reason to read the studies. Oh, which while I'm thinking about it, shameless plug for the Rogue Journal Club. I know you probably, if you're watching this, you've probably heard about the gas stoves kerfuffle in the United States. We found one of the articles, and that's going to be a topic of the next Rogue Journal Club, is to get into the scientific studies around the health hazards of gas stoves. So I will leave it
I
at
will
that.
just say, though, as a larger narrative on this isn't exclusive to the US, by the way. They're actually pushing it here as well.
Ah, well,
So, so I just want to contextualize it. This is actually, and again, I don't want to go on a bigger tangent here, but this is a WF endorsed
yeah, the
push.
WEF.
Yeah, the
Sie shall
WEF.
give up the gas stoves.
Yeah.
Let's
But
see here.
yeah.
For example, the paper might be providing simply.
Hmm.
For
Is there a
example,
translate button?
oh, shut up. For example, the paper might simply be providing some evidence for possible explanations of some long-standing observation, or it might be presenting a highly speculative idea that has a low probability of actually turning out to be true. Some of my colleagues have expressed concern that the media may make stronger claims about the results than the original paper did. So I think that's a common complaint.
Yeah.
Let's see. General public could be forgiven for not understanding that just because the media has highlighted an interesting idea with low probability of being correct, this does not mean the idea is true. I think that's fair. We could forgive everybody because there's a lot of stuff that gets filtered through the media.
Well, it's everything is diluted. If you go back to the climate reports, right? So you have it in its purest, neat form, right? And it goes and again, Mr. Analogy here, but it's almost like alcohol, right? You have at its core where you've got the actual raw data that's coming out. That's like your neat,
Gotta
neat
make your
alcohol.
moonshine.
Yeah, exactly, right? And you have to be a specific person to have a tolerance that's able to take that. Not everyone is.
Mm,
Tolerance in this equation is people with the know-how how to interpret that data. Then it gets diluted, and taken down another level, and that's where like the diplomats are translating it. From there, you need people to have that tolerance to understand it.
right.
And then the other thing that happens, this is when you put your ice in your whiskey and it dilutes it to tap water effectively. But
Mm,
that's when it gets diluted again, and this is when it translates onto social media. It gets picked up as as like all of these activists. So the data gets translated again and diluted again.
right.
And that's for a different group of people. And there's people that can understand and translate the information at different steps along the way, but you won't hit everybody at all the other steps.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I love the example here. For example, I might get something from a friend saying scientists showed that our universe is the result of a collision with within the multiverse. You must be very excited by this since the James Webb Telescope will soon prove this for certain any day now.
I want to know what happens if there's a collision in the metaverse.
That's a very good question. I mean, do the data clusters just get stuck together?
Yeah.
I have to explain
It's,
that
it's
this
going
is
to be called the Big Scrub.
I have to explain that this is a very speculative idea by some cosmologists, and that it could be possible that some hint of whether this is true might be obtained in the future when the JWT has made long time observations of features in the universe. However, even if something is found in the large scale structure of the universe, there could be many other possible explanations that differ from the proposed collision with another universe. The response I get is, well, if this is so speculative, why did the media report on this and why was it tweeted everywhere? It must be very important and is probably soon going to be confirmed. Anecdotal, yes, but this is where we get into the tweets. I want to get down to the thing about scientists themselves because yeah. One can see why the general public is susceptible to these types of issues because they do not often understand really why science works, or how science works, rather. I'm reading between the lines, sorry. They think it is more like a light switch. Performing the study is like flipping the switch, and either light turns on or it does not turn on. So you have a clear-cut result and you are done. They are not necessarily acting unreasonably because they are assuming that if something is being talked about on social or news media, it must not only be important, but has been carefully vetted and is highly likely to be true. This is
Yeah.
absolutely not always the case.
No, it's not, but it applies to what I said. As soon as it's published in these mammoth titles and everything, they have their own air of legitimacy about them.
Mhm. Now, scientists are being human, and that's why I want to highlight this. The issue I am having is that I'm noticing more and more working scientists engaging in the same behavior as the general public. They email or tweet that some new studies show or prove such and such result, or they tweet out, our group just submitted a new preprint showing that everything is happening for sure this reason. This is followed by dozens or even hundreds of retweets from other scientists saying, amazing job, super great work, truly convincing, no doubt a Nobel Prize awaits you, or double plus good work.
Double plus good work. Double plus good.
Many of the retweets arrive only a handful of minutes after the original posting, so it is obvious that few retweeters actually read the paper. This is particularly odd because most scientists regularly review papers and attend talks. Yes. Yes. Which, by the way, as a peer reviewer, you don't get paid for doing peer review either.
Yeah, I mean, but it also goes back to what was in here, where it made the point that most things are discussed at conferences and talks and stuff. But
Yep.
this is also how many times have people put news articles, and the thing that really grates on me and really annoys me, and I see everybody doing this, it's when someone takes a screenshot of a news article that's been tweeted with just a headline, but they won't actually post a link to it. And it's like it took you more effort to do that. But
Yep.
even when people post a link, they don't read the article, they'll just read that little
Yep.
the little
The
snippet.
little bleep at the top.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because they've done this with eye tracking studies, actually.
Yeah.
So it's just like a fancy device that just like sits on your computer and
Yep.
just tracks where your eye is going on a screen as you're reading it. And what they find is that it's like a reverse F. Oh, it's like an F shape. As somebody's going down the page, they'll read the top line first in full length, the next line a little bit short, a little short, a little short, until you get to the
Yeah.
end. You're just not reading all the way you're not reading all the way across the page
Yeah.
with every line you go down. And that's what's been found in the literature. It's just the way people read, particularly if they're in a hurry.
I wonder if is there a gender divide on that?
I
I think
don't know.
I think there somehow is, because I remember a while ago I looked into that, because again it's useful for web design. Because when you are putting content together, you need to work out where to put a company's products and stuff like that, and where to do it. But I think there was a gender split. I'll have to look. It's been a long time since
I don't know. I'd have
I've
to go look
looked, but
myself. I don't
yeah.
remember seeing that with the eye tracking studies. It seemed to be a pretty common thing between both men and women.
I mean, men are definitely more visual.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether they would emanate or be gravitating towards images more. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Let me see, where is it? Because he talked about that specific. Okay, this brings me to a recent example of this phenomena and the danger it entails. Recently, a preprint was posted on the internet and was titled "Decades of Systemic Racism and Systemic Racial Disparities in Funding Rates at the National Science Foundation." In this preprint, the authors analyzed funding data from the National Science Foundation to show that there's a persistent and longstanding gap between the rate at which proposals submitted by white principal investigators PIs, by the way, are funded and the rate at which proposals submitted by PIs from other groups are funded. The relative funding success rate gap is over 20 percentage points between Asian and white PIs. In the abstract, the authors write, the prevalence and persistence of these racialized funding disparities have cascading impacts that perpetuate accumulated advantage to white PIs across all of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The authors then attribute the gaps in relative funding success rates to systemic racism, writing. Systemic racism manifests at the NSF as higher funding rates for proposals by white PIs than those by non-white PIs, conferring a cumulative racial advantage. So that was the preprint. And it did get a lot of press. I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the press about it many, many times over. I think it got press in Nature. for God's sake. So,
Wow.
the preprint was tweeted out by the authors along with the message that the asks one read paper that makes no freaking sense. Say that makes no damn sense. It's been a while since I've read this article. 1, read the paper. 2, send it to people. 3, talk about it here and elsewhere. It is indeed being talked about in various science blogs and reported in science news outlets such as Science Magazine. But I have doubts about how often the preprint, which runs to 72 pages, which is fucking long, by the way,
Yeah.
was actually read or seriously discussed. One of the most stunning graphs in the preprint, figure 6, shows that over 2-decade time frame, there is a cumulative advantage in proposal funding amounting to 12,820 proposals for white PIs versus minus 9,701 for Asian PIs, with the size of the gap increasing over time. A similar but much smaller effect appears for Black and Hispanic PIs. Science Magazine ran a news story on the preprint discussing the implications, stating, quote, the team gave a copy of its analysis to NSF leadership, which is not challenging its conclusions. That's a problem right there. NSF shares these concerns about systemic racial disparities in funding at NSF and other federal agencies, an agency spokesperson says. Another news media report stated, quote, the results, which NSF is not disputing, suggest that systemic racism manifests at NSF as higher funding rate. That's your line example right there. I don't even need to finish reading it. Let's see. So when I first heard about the results of the preprint, I thought they sounded rather odd because I know a fraction of Asian research faculty members being hired. He did. I want to find it and I can't remember where it is, but he did a whole thing in here, basically going into different funding mechanisms, and then because he talked about it. It's a long piece, so I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but go back to it. Let's see. Chen et al. Tweeted out their findings and even asked for feedbacks. This sounds good in principle, but the retweets from other STEM scientists gave very little feedback, but instead repeated how this work is amazing and important and clearly showing the effects of systemic racism. This is where Twitter science goes wrong.
Yeah.
You can see it, right? Because every scientist that's on Twitter is a much younger generation than your Anna Krailovs of who are,
and you need to be seen. You need to be seen to
but this is getting
with
talked about, right? Am I correct in thinking that because this is getting talked about highly on Twitter and being phrased this way, that would get picked up by Nature, Science?
Oh yeah, they will. As I said, they'll have their fingers on the pulse, and any reporter will be looking at things that trend, because obviously if you're in a digital world where you're doing digital stories, you need to look at the digital landscape. And if you can find something that's already trending and you put a news article up about it and tap into that, it's like what people do, they when something goes viral, they will make content, ad nauseum about these things because they're riding that wave. And the same thing that happens here is that it will compound it even more. And a publication writing about it will also give it more legitimacy, and then the other ones will get on the bandwagon and more.
Yeah. Twitter science is an oxymoron. I don't know about oxymoron necessarily as much as just dilute science, really. I don't think oxymoron's the right word necessarily.
No,
because you're just talking about, I don't know, maybe it's well, all right, maybe oxymoron is the right thing if you're talking about science as being, the adversarial and the argumentative, whereas Twitter, you can quite easily make an echo chamber.
I think that's the best way to put it.
Yes, that is a good way to put it. Yes. So maybe I can see the oxymoron argument, but
I'd call it a brand.
Yeah, I'd call it a brand kind of thing too.
Yeah,
it certainly dilutes real science from happening.
It's almost like a sub medium.
Yeah,
in a sense. Yeah, and I mean the thing is as well, I mean there's so many different tangents you could go down with this because one of the main ones is again on that theme of dilution. You also have to be you have these people that do these threads as well. And so what happens is you need to translate um you need to translate it so that it feeds into hang on, I've got to check. Hang on. Hang on. Oh, it doesn't tell you anymore. How many characters is Twitter now? A tweet?
It's 280.
280. So yeah, so you've got to make sure that things fall within the 280
Mhm.
for your
Either that, or you got
tweets.
to start making a thread.
Exactly. But then the longer your every tweet you do on a thread, you run the risk of it of people not again, just like an article, they drop off.
Yeah.
So there's more that you also need to translate, and the whole idea of it being, good to free it up from jargon. It's everything is a double-edged sword with this stuff.
Yeah.
You need
So,
to make it fertile ground for being a contender for a viral bit of content,
mhm.
but then that comes to the detriment of actual science
Right.
and the real data that needs to get through.
So the YouTube chat is 200 characters for comparison.
Right.
But yeah, and I mean you got to do it really quickly, but it doesn't really facilitate pushing things through social media doesn't facilitate discussion. And I will make one exception to that because I would not have a problem if like again, I'm maybe we're tooting our own horn a little bit with something like YouTube or a podcast where you're getting into with the Rogue Journal Club, you're talking about a study and going back and forth and like, what the heck is this? And getting
Yeah.
into that kind of critical feedback. That's different. But if you're just at like Instagram post or Facebook post or something like that, that really does not often allow for great argumentation of it. That doesn't get really nasty sometimes.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said when you're actually face to face, even if it's digital and it's pixel to pixel, with the person that you are discussing it with. And
One
I would
box in the
say
corner
that's
versus another box in the corner.
exactly, and it's like, or when do they still do this now when you have a new account and they just put default your profile icon as an egg? Do you remember when it was like eggs?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that was Twitter back in the day.
yeah, but do they still do that now?
No, I think
Or
it's just like the generic fake person.
yeah. You're going egg to egg to egg.
Can we throw
um,
the eggs? Start a food fight?
to to have some cracking discourse. But with everyone walking on eggshells. I'll stop now.
No,
Um,
no, no, no.
but
I'm getting closer. But I like this story because it highlights a point of a problem. Because I
yeah.
think if you go on to find there is something called academic Twitter. So like if you look at hashtag academic Twitter or hashtag
Hmm.
science Twitter on Twitter, you will see you will see the scientists going back and forth. Most of them tag their stuff with that if it's about a science related thing. That's a way to find it if you're looking for it. But
Yeah, I just think the medium in itself is the shortcoming, not the
oh
individuals
yeah,
whom.
there's that thing by the way.
Oh, good God. Good lordy. Wait, hang on a minute. A rat? Hang
Yes,
on.
a rat is included in there.
What the? We are pathetic.
What, you think more people should be able to beat up a rat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not advocating for rat beating rights, but I don't want it enshrined in any kind of constitution or something like that. But if you're partial to beating up a rat, then I think people should be expected they can do that. These people are feeble.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna look at it now, but if you go into hashtag academic Twitter
Mm.
or hashtag science Twitter, you can find it. But
But it's
the
almost like lists on Twitter as well.
yeah,
You can do lists, and it brings together a meeting of the minds. But I still think,
bye Bart.
oh, you off. See you. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Um,
Bye.
but it. Yeah, I think the shortcoming is the medium. It's not. It's the arena. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
anything
And that's the
else.
point here too, is like Twitter may be an excellent platform for posting boasts, emojis, or insults, but it's pretty poor for conveying complex. We've been
Well,
talking too long.
that being said, though, I think Twitter Spaces is as close as you can come.
Yeah, I think Twitter Spaces is definitely better. I haven't tried it too much yet, but I think that
Oh,
would.
I think I've lurked. I'm always a lurker. I never participate. I should probably.
I think we've been I think we've been talking about it. This underscores the danger of what I call Twitter science, in which researchers can tweet very shoddy or misleading work just by highlighting a couple of sentences of the result, particularly a result that favors a particular agenda, while conveniently omitting any possible confounding issues or competing effects. Here's the thing. This is where I would love to see, if scientists are going to be on Twitter, this is where I would love to see them learn the thing about errors of commission and omission and things like that, and associated real journalism ethics, not journalistic ethics, all of that Rutledge justice centered crap. Because I
Yeah.
think that would facilitate that kind of issue.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I definitely think that there are better arenas, and I think that things like Twitter. I mean, even comment sections aren't the best
No.
thing. And I mean, again, focusing on this, it's I don't know if you know this chap, but the guy Marshall McLuhan, his famous line is "the medium is the message,"
Yeah.
and the premise that actually it's the medium through which the message is put out on, that it is the thing that we should be looking at rather than actually what's being said on it.
Right.
And so I think that's what it is. I think definitely YouTube, but again, it's very tricky, right? Because if you're just doing this solo,
Hmm.
then again you run the risk of having just a chat of icons.
Yeah.
This is different. This is more in the vein of it. And
Yeah.
I think again this then bridges over nicely with Twitter Spaces. It comes down to the only way a productive chat is when you are face to face
Oh
with
yeah.
that person,
Oh yeah.
because you're held accountable. There's accountability,
Well,
and there's some decorum you have to show.
yeah, and I've also thought that one of the things that happens when it's, somebody to an icon or something like that, or
Hmm.
what have you, even if there's somebody's photo in the icon, that's not a person. It's easy
Yeah,
to dehumanize a picture or a pixel or a
yeah,
caricature, or even like my little double S logo or something like that. You could easily
yeah,
dehumanize that and just go off into all sorts of nasty things. And so this kind of thing that we're doing, and I think this should be done more, is as we're going into the next generation of scientists, is have more things like this where you're talking about articles online and having conversations where you have the public get engaged. I like the Dark Horse podcast for that reason, with Heather Hang and Brett Weinstein. I think that's actually a very good way to go about it.
yeah.
Um, but just even more for just like general public
Yeah,
thing.
more public forums where
Yeah.
it's accessible. So, and again, I don't want to run the risk of sounding, a bit odd with this, but I think, and again, I don't mean this judgmentally, but dumbing things down, or making things more
Mhm.
accessible language wise, but within the safety net of having people like yourself that know how to translate this stuff
Right.
so that the context is still retained,
Mhm.
but there is that communication. And I always bring it back to almost like, for years I had doctors that spoke at me, and it's only recently I've got a doctor that speaks with me and treats me like someone that's
Right.
actually human and knows, and talks to me like they're discussing something. And I think that's the same thing. There shouldn't be a superiority complex.
Mhm.
Um, and I think,
Yeah.
I think if that's done in the
The other
like public
yeah.
forum, then
The other
fine.
problem with Twitter science is that it kind of reinforces the hive mind, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um,
It rewards it.
yeah, somebody's like, when you're putting a counterpoint up against a paper, you do start getting people butting heads with each other. And part of this I blame, of course, on the way we're training students generally now, that it's okay to be offended at every little thing. I can never be
Yeah.
wrong, which is a horrible way to do it, because you're gonna be wrong a lot if you're a
Yeah.
scientist. So you should get used to that.
And if you never challenge, you're going to be wrong a lot more.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So there's a lot of bad things that I can see happen, and it's just like, yeah. I'm rather suspicious of the motives of many of these people who push for expanded studies in certain politically charged topics and promote works in these areas. Call me cynical, but in many cases, I seriously doubt these people actually care at all about possible socially relevant issues being addressed in a productive manner. Instead, they're simply doing this to advance their own careers. Dead giveaway is that the motives are not exactly pure in how fast people launch an attack, often ad hominem, against anyone who points out an issue with their work rather than seriously taking the points raised by the criticism into consideration. Twitter science facilitates that. Social media
Yeah.
science in general kind of facilitates that thing, and unfortunately gets amplified with journalism. I think is the ultimate point I'm kind of making.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff. I mean, think about how much, I don't spend much time, if any time. I mean, hard to believe, I know, but I limit myself to about 2 hours social media a day. Anyone that looks, it might look like I'm on there all day, but I'm dipping in, right? I'll do something and I'll go
I think
away.
you've technically already done double that today, given the length of our stream. But anyway,
Well, this isn't social media.
social media
Go
is not real life.
No, no. And but this is the thing, right? It's like how many people, like for example, as good as the Twitter files were, look at the way that was disseminated. It was I mean, obviously it was great because obviously it was about Twitter and it was published first on Twitter. I fully understand why.
Well, yeah, that was Elon Musk's thing. It had to be
Yeah,
published on Twitter first.
but think about it, right? Lots of stories now are being broken on threads on Twitter. Tweets are being quoted as authoritative sources in media.
I've actually heard this from editors. Is there such thing as an anti-social media? There we go.
Yeah, my Twitter feed.
But yeah, actually, now that I have it, I'll put this up here so folks know. I just wanted to. Well, we can keep talking while this is up, and folks can get a sense. But like if you just do a search for hashtag science Twitter, you'll find all sorts of things.
And I'm sure there's probably lists that are associated that you can join, and you'll get updates from that. And you're in a kind of more conversational, realm with that stuff.
And some of it's gotten weird. Like
I was going to say, this is a wild space.
Yeah, science Twitter is not necessarily. Science Twitter can be really strange. I will warn you in advance.
I may have to bookmark this hashtag. This looks wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whitewashing. Oh no, we found the wokies.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You do have a lot of the wokies who use this hashtag, so you might just find that.
Oh, the wokey cokey.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting if you want to go see what's going on with that. I mean, the other one is there it is. Oh, there we go.
Yes. Yes.
So this is other folks who are talking about, I passed my PhD exams and other kinds of things like that. But you can also find academic Twitter. Oh, tank breaking in the old. Oh, okay. Whoops.
Breaking news.
I think, yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
No, there's been a lot happening in Peru, but there's been pretty much a media blackout.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the other place would be to just go to some of the professional societies that are there as scientists. So, like the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, which publishes Science Magazine, is on Twitter. So you can see some of their stuff too. But anyway, I just wanted to have that up there, and this can go away. Sorry. But
yeah.
But but in the vein, since I think we're closing in on the end of our conversation, never want to leave people with the depression of, oh my God, look at all this awful stuff. So the question, of course, is, what to do about it. And I know for me, my kind of thing with that is it's like, if you read a story where it says, studies show this or study says that, the gas stoves thing is a prime example.
Yeah.
Don't just go read like competing news article headline, but like one of the the study that Gina and I are going to talk about, that's an open access study. It's not behind a paywall. And so if it's not behind a paywall, go find it and, you know, take a look through it, because if you're if you're versed enough in logic, you can pick out the logical flaws in the argumentation and the methodology if it exists. Um, and it's fair to question it. It's fair to ask that kind of thing about it. And
That
so,
should be the takeaway. Question everything, and
yeah,
that will do you good
yeah.
with everything.
I mean, I don't have a problem with folks questioning any study that I've ever done, or
I'm
anything
just
like
going to quickly pop down because I'm just under the desk because my charger's not plugged in. So just 2 seconds.
that. Oh, do you
I
want to turn the
disappear.
camera off first? There we go.
There we go. There we go. Right, bloody hell, where's this cable going?
Live technical fix.
Live.
Do we need some Jeopardy theme music or something? But I mean, that's the one takeaway that I would had for you guys. And if you all have any questions about, you know, what kind of things should you look at, what kind of things should you keep in mind when you see something about a study pop up on Twitter, or in a news media article, this is a good time to ask, because that's one thing. Is, of course, I just don't want to leave you all with like, I'm totally confused, I have no idea what to do, those kinds of things. So I'd go ahead and do that. Have thoughts or questions, but that's my general kind of thought, is just, you know, make sure you're not just taking what an article or a tweet says about something, some study that was done, at face value, because it can be all sorts of wrong. And it could be a tweet that says this study is garbage, and you go read it and like, no, actually that sounds pretty damn reasonable.
Yeah, if they if something is worth being treated as or given the benefit of the doubt, then it should not be afraid to show its sources.
Mhm.
And you know, there's lots of different. Maybe I'll show the press release that I got through the song
Yeah,
lyrics one
yeah,
in the
show it,
after show.
I'm sure.
But I have one here, and I'll give you 2 examples. So I've got one that's an email where it says, you know, studies show that blah 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 blah, and then you realize that actually, you know, it's been commissioned from a casino company,
Mm.
and there's no data at all. And then there's another one that I've got with song lyrics that have been like a study done on song lyrics. And if you go to this page, it actually shows the methodology.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 2 types. And yes, it is a bit of a really weird and.
Mm-hmm. So, oh, and yeah,
Yeah.
in that vein, with transparency, as I see Wikipedia saying, with any studies that you go look at, if it was a study paid for, I don't know what the laws are in the UK, so I can't comment on that. But if it was a study paid for by a US government agency or a state government agency, by law, they must put the grant number and the funding agency somewhere in the listing of it, to say this is the agency that funded it, so you have some transparency to go back and see how much taxpayer money was spent on something.
Right.
So you can go find that. That is quite often listed in, it's either the acknowledgement section, or sometimes there's a specific section for financial support for the article that was published. They must.
So if you don't like it, you can claim it back.
So you can always go find, you know, how much money was spent on it. Because like I've done this with the NSF. I've talked about it actually on the channel a couple of times. It's like, if there's something funded by the National Science Foundation, if there's a grant number at the end of the paper, you can go trace back through the NSF website, find the grant number, and find out how much money was spent on that grant, how long it ran, who it went to, all this other kind of stuff. It's publicly available information. There's nothing hidden behind a paywall. And by law in the United States, it must be publicly available. That is not always true if a private entity funded something. They will often acknowledge it because it's just good ethics to say, you know, so-and-so published, so-and-so helped paid for my work. It's nice to acknowledge them. It's just standard ethics when you're writing an article. But the same kind of thing is like, just keep in mind what news media outlet I think it's coming from too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did
I mean,
you just suddenly went really quiet.
Oh, did I? Is this a bit better? Any better now? Any better now?
Yeah, you're a
Better
little bit
now?
better. Yeah.
Better now?
There we go. That's it.
There we go. There we go. Yeah, usually I forget how to do it off the top of my head. But a lot of the times it's not hard to do a very quick Google search to find out where publications get their funding. And so by doing that, you will be able to vet interests, right? You can, as they always say, follow the money and see what's happening. But the thing is there's plenty of I know I sort of had my points about citizen journalism, but there's plenty of independent blogs and things like that, and you shouldn't look at the prestige of a site to judge its worthiness. You should look at the way that they are formulating their work and showing their workings out. If you've got, joeblogs.net and he's posted something, then take it with a pinch of salt because you don't know, him from a hole in the wall. But at the same time, if they've got links that backing up what they're saying and they're showing their workings out,
Whoops.
then what was that?
Sorry.
Did I just read that as the reason we learn?
Sorry. I forgot to edit it.
I'm moonlighting. I'm
Sorry.
moonlighting. I tell you what, Deb's done a great deal dyeing her hair.
She did. It looks fabulous.
I know. I mean, she's cut it as well. Look, I mean, straight over your head. But yeah, they should have the links on the article that shows exactly where they're getting stuff from. So don't discredit something just because it's not, the people that you necessarily go to. But at the same time, it's good for you to have a solid grip on who your trusted sources are.
Yeah.
But they're not always going to be. So always be diligent.
So do any of y'all have any questions for us as we close this out? We're going to pop over to locals here shortly, so I will put that up here for anybody who wants to come join us. That's what I was trying to do as I was trying to write that. Forgive me, I have trouble with StreamYard someday. And this is specifically for supporters. So if you're a locals member, the way they do it now is that you'll eventually get kicked off. I think it's like after a couple of minutes, they kick off anybody who's not a supporter if it's a supporters only live stream. So
we send in the heavies and they
no, I do it on my supporters on locals as cheap as $3 a month. Or if you do it annual, it's $30 a year and you get 2 months for free. So
bargain.
Exactly.
And great content. So,
yes, and one thing
you
I
will
will
never be misled again about studies.
The other thing I will say also for supporters is that you get all my videos before they appear on YouTube, and you get them ad-free at the same. Well, not supporters, for members, just generally speaking, you get them all ad-free as they appear on locals first. And I will do better this time because I'm traveling next week, and I will make a point this time to upload some content before I go. I totally forgot last week. Does anybody have any thoughts? I think that pretty much wraps up everything for the conversation. And
yeah, I think everyone asked.
I've ever done.
Yeah, I mean, everyone asked a lot of questions, so I mean, I think they're maybe all questioned out.
Are you all questioned out there?
That's a question to ask you whether you have any questions. It's question inception.
Remember, it's fine.
Anything?
I think we can wrap up then. Thank you for joining the party. This has been fun.
No, pleasure is all mine. It was good fun.
We had a grand old time. Some great conversation, content, and all that. And again, for local supporters, we will be. You missed most of the propaganda. Well, watch it on replay.
Yeah.
So yeah, for local supporters, we're going to head over, and in a few minutes, hopefully, if I can get OBS and StreamYard to cooperate with each other, we will have a nice.
That's usually half the fun of those shows. I'm giving you a little bit of inside baseball.
And we will have a good old time over there. Closing thoughts? Anything you want to plug before you go, aside from your Twitter?
Yeah. follow me on Twitter and all of the. It's very easy just to push people to one place and then they can find everything. So yeah, just follow me on Twitter, Kieran J White, and yeah, join the circus.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Circus there. All righty. Whoopsie. Turn that back off. Stop. Okay. Technology and I don't necessarily always.
This is a preview of what you can see on the Locals exclusive in 10 minutes' time. Sign up now.
Technology. Alrighty, I think that's it. Thank you all again. Next Rogue Journal Club will be coming out soon. First, that always appears first on Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all that jazz, and then the YouTube version comes after that. We're going to record that in February. I will record some content next week. There's a follow-up in the Fiedler on the Roof saga that I'm going to record later today, and I'll have that post next week. And I think I have something else that's. Oh, yeah. And a related thing to the Fiedler on the Roof, I actually am going to get into the activist thinking thing a little bit more. So that ought to be fun for folks. So until next time, everybody, we hope you stay curious. Bye-bye.
Bye.